Chapter 729. Looking at the silver handgun pointed at him, Fang Xinjian was stunned for a moment. How long had it been since he had come into contact with a gun, and how long had it been since someone had pointed a gun at him? With a single thought, he raised his finger slightly, and the handgun disintegrated at the molecular level, completely dissipating into the air. At the sight of this scene, the countenance of the blonde lady changed. However, she did not panic. Instead, she looked at Fang Xinjian thoughtfully and said, "So that's how it is. Extraordinary human?" She threw a glance at Fang Xinjian's black robe and his naked body under it and said, "It seems that you're not doing very well. Which country are you a fugitive from? Terrorist? Or a mercenary?" The blonde lady smiled and said, "Trying to use your abilities to deceive people and cheat money won't work in the United States. Thankfully, you met me. If you had met the people from the law enforcing department, you'd probably have to spend the rest of your life in a laboratory." As she spoke, she restarted the sports car. Accompanied by the piercing sound of tires rubbing against each other, the sports car continued to head in the direction of Beverly Hills. That was the wealthy district of Los Angeles, and it was also where the blonde lady's clan was located. As the car sped along the road, the blonde lady said, "What's your ability? Invisibility? Psychokinesis? Teleportation?" The blonde lady threw a glance at Fang Xinjian, grabbed onto the steering wheel with one hand, and suddenly clenched her other hand into a fist. Then, she punched out. Accompanied by crackling explosive sounds, a stream of faint white force cut across, and her fist stopped right before the tip of Fang Xinjian's nose. "You're not the only extraordinary human in this world. I have a fitness system that allows my physical body to grow endlessly stronger. My current fist strength is about 10 tons, and my 100-meter dash speed is about 1.2 seconds. The density of my muscles and bones can withstand a shot from a handgun head-on. If you had continued to attack earlier, you'd be dead." Speaking up to this point, the woman proudly swept her blonde hair. "Seeing that you're not bad-looking, I can offer you a job." Fang Xinjian's martial will continued to scan her body. When he heard the words fitness system, his eyes narrowed slightly and he asked, "You can see your own stats window?" "Haha, of course." The blonde beauty glanced at Fang Xinjian with a smile. "Rookie, don't tell me you've always thought that you're the only one in this world with supernatural powers and a system?" This was not the first time she had met such a country bumpkin. Many of the superhumans were just normal citizens before they obtained supernatural abilities. They did not know about the dark side of the world, and once they obtained power that normal people did not have, they were usually controlled by ambition and desire. They thought that they were different and invincible. Fang Xinjian was indeed a little astonished. It seemed that this world's control over ether particles was different from what he had imagined. He paused and asked, "What is a system?" "Northeast of the Philippines, over the Maria Na Islands." The black high-tech fighter jet streaked across the sky, and the nuclear fusion engine continuously ejected streams of flames, accelerating the jet's speed. The black domain paint on the surface of the fuselage perfectly absorbed the electromagnetic waves of the various countries' radars, allowing it to pass through the airspace of the East Asian countries almost invisibly. In the fuselage, the bloody Queen Elizabeth sat in the co-pilot seat, chewing on bubble gum and crossing her legs. Her fingers twirled around her pink hair as she asked, "Xiao He, where on earth are we going?" The Dark Knight did not say anything. Instead, she placed a test tube that was filled with murky white liquid next to Elizabeth's mouth. "Eat this. Hee, it's so white and tender. Is this your essence?" "I can help you squeeze it out," Elizabeth said, licking her blood-red lips. Crackling sounds rang out. After activating the electric shock, the Dark Knight poured the liquid in the test tube into Elizabeth's mouth. At the next moment, the Dark Knight's voice rang out in Elizabeth's mind, "Can you hear me?" "What the hell?" Elizabeth said in astonishment. "That thing of yours has such an effect?" The Dark Knight said coldly, This is a new generation of femtometer robot. It possesses quantum information transmission technology and can transmit information from the brain directly to the other party's brain. This will allow us to maintain communication at all times. As the Dark Knight spoke, the black fighter jet made a turn and charged down toward the surface of the sea. Hey! Elizabeth looked at this scene in astonishment and said, "Is your plane heading in the wrong direction?" The Dark Knight ignored her and continued to accelerate, plunging down diagonally toward the surface of the sea. Eventually, under Elizabeth's horrified gaze, the fighter jet collided into the surface of the sea with a bang. In that instant, its wings retracted and its engines switched, and it dove into the depths of the sea like a fish. Wow! Elizabeth looked at the scenes at the bottom of the sea like a little child. However, as the fighter jet continued to dive deeper into the sea, the surroundings became pitch black. In this bottomless darkness, only the lone light of the fighter jet shone up ahead. This caused the Bloody Queen to feel a hint of terror. The two of them dived down to a depth of 7,000 meters. Elizabeth finally could not hold it in any longer and asked, "How deep are you going to dive?" The Dark Knight said calmly, "Our target is the Fitchaz Sea Abyss, which is 11,000 meters deep, the deepest point on Earth." Suddenly, a huge pitch-black shadow flashed past. The Bloody Queen cried out in astonishment, "What the hell is that?" At the next moment, the fighter jet trembled and came to a stop. Amidst the dim lights, two huge light spots could be seen shooting toward them. The fighter jet's headlights shot toward the light spots. Under Elizabeth's astonished gaze, an octopus with a length of several hundred meters wrapped its tentacles around the fighter jet. The two huge light spots from earlier were its eyes. Or rather, this was no longer an octopus but a sea monster from the abyss. In the blurry darkness, many huge black shadows had unknowingly surrounded the fighter jet. Damn it! Its fangs burst out in that instant, and streams of blood-red flames extended out from its palm. Elizabeth gritted her teeth and said, "You're the one who's going to die. Calm down. He's one of us," the Dark Knight said calmly. At the next moment, the octopus released its tentacles. Then at a depth of over 7,000 meters, a middle-aged man with 4 muscular limbs, a face full of beard, and wearing coral armor floated up to the fighter jet. The holder of the Sea God system, the Sea God Constantine. He's also the manager of the Sea Abyss prison. As the Dark Knight spoke, he opened the cabin door. However, the seawater did not enter. A bubble encompassed the Dark Knight and Elizabeth. Constantine threw a cold glance toward the two of them and said, "Peter, according to the rules, you shouldn't have brought anyone here. The situation is urgent and I have no other choice," the Dark Knight said. "Bring me to the prison. I want to bring one person out." Constantine frowned slightly. However, he still opened his mouth and let out a soundless cry. The cry spread out rapidly at the bottom of the sea. Then, under the escort of over 10 sea monsters, the three of them passed through the sea monster zone that was 1,000 meters deep and reached the abyss that was 8,000 meters deep. This was a forbidden zone for living creatures, and all the sea monsters were left behind. The three of them continued to dive in the bubble created by Constantine until a majestic undersea city appeared in front of them. The Sea Abyss prison was the prison with the strongest defense in history created by the Radiant Congress. Several tens of extremely dangerous extraordinary humans who were thought to be hard to control and had the ability to destroy the entire human civilization were sealed there. Chapter 730. The Dark Knight, Elizabeth, and Constantine walked along the steel corridor. There were combat robots that walked on treads everywhere, as well as fully automatic weapons that were hidden under the steel walls. Other than the extraordinary humans who were locked up, there were no other humans in the entire Ocean Abyss prison. It was because the Dark Knights did not trust any humans. This place was controlled by the artificial intelligence Zeus all year round, and all the extraordinary humans were locked up with all sorts of targeted measures. If there were any signs of an escape, the entire area would be vaporized by the plasma flames of 20,000 degrees Celsius. If one were to break out of the prison, the entire prison would be compressed into 1 cubic centimeter of impurities by the 32 gravitational bombs that the Dark Knights had left behind. Comparatively speaking, the water pressure of the deep sea, which was 11,000 meters deep, was nothing much. As for the sea sovereign Constantine and his sea monster army at the periphery, they were not there to prevent the extraordinary humans from escaping. Instead, they were there to prevent people from barging in. Cool. Elizabeth looked at the steel fortress and said, "Then how are you guys going to send the resources over?" Constantine explained, "There's no need for resources. The entire prison forbids all communication between the inside and outside. The prison's energy reserves are sufficient for this place to run for 50 years. Elizabeth then asked, "Then don't the people locked up here need to eat?" Constantine let out a bitter laugh. "The reason we lock them up here is only because we're temporarily unable to kill them." Elizabeth was stunned for a moment. She looked at the two of them walking away, rolled her eyes, and continued to chase after them. The three of them took the elevator and arrived at the deepest part of the prison, the area where the most dangerous extraordinary humans in history had been sealed. The metal door opened, and as moldy air wafted out, the first detention room appeared before the three of them. There was a huge pupa inside, and it looked like it was dead. "What the hell is this?" Elizabeth asked curiously. "It seems to be dead?" "The possessor of the bug tribe's system." Constantine looked at the dead pupa, and a hint of coldness was still emitting from his eyes. "For the past 3 years we've tried several hundred methods, but we weren't able to kill it. Instead, it continued to evolve under the incessant attacks, gaining an increasingly stronger vitality. This system seems to be able to convert danger into energy to upgrade itself. So for the next 7 years, we imprisoned it in this vacuum environment, but this was only a temporary state of dormancy. Even so, it still multiplied at a rate of 0.3% every year. This thing has astonishing vitality and reproduction ability. When it was first discovered, it had occupied almost 1/3 of the Pacific Ocean. The Radiant Congress had to mobilize more than half of their forces to seal it up with great difficulty. Hearing Constantine's helpless voice, the Bloody Queen swallowed her saliva. She suddenly felt that it was great that this world had the Radiant Congress. In the next holding area, there was a huge transparent pillar surrounded by countless metal devices. It was empty. "What the hell? Did something escape?" Elizabeth exclaimed. "No." Constantine explained, "That's the owner of the electronic life system. Do you still remember the global blackout 7 years ago? That was to completely kill him, who had an unlimited backup. Although his body has already been beaten up into a chip by us, we realized that as we continued to beat him up, his body was able to break down almost limitlessly. After shattering him into millimeters, in order to prevent him from going out of control, we stopped our attempts to kill him. Instead, we used a strong magnetic field to restrain him here." Elizabeth exhaled and said, "You guys have really placed a bunch of bombs here." The third holding room was a standard study room. Rows of bookshelves were placed here, and there were several 100,000 books on them. It was as if this place had turned into a sea of books. However, the entire study room's floor, walls, and roof were all covered by layers of insulators. There were only hints of dim light shining down from the entire study room. In the center of the study room, a black-haired child who looked to be only in his teens had his back facing the three of them. He was reading an erotic magazine, and his body kept on moving. Elizabeth smiled and asked, "Who is this little kid?" Hearing Elizabeth's laughter, the child, who was dealing with his physical needs, turned around abruptly. He then let out a cry and ran to the back of the bookshelf. Rustling sounds of clothes being put on rang out, and the child said in exasperation, "Be *****. Peter, Constantine, who allowed you guys to come in casually. Don't you know how to greet me?" Constantine shrugged. Cyrus, you're too focused. Bullsh *t. If you were to be locked up here for 20 years, I guarantee that you'd be even more of a pervert than me. You'd just have sex with that bunch of little monsters of yours. Why, did you guys bring me an inflatable doll this time around? The little boy walked out after putting on his pants. He threw a glance toward the Dark Knight and Constantine, and then at the next moment, he looked toward Elizabeth with gleaming eyes. The Dark Knight's voice rang out in Elizabeth's mind, the possessor of the evolution system, Cyrus. He can absorb almost all the energy in this world, and the instincts of living creatures will allow him to engulf everything he sees almost without any restrictions. Based on my calculations, if he were to release the restrictions, he'd probably be able to engulf the entire human society within a year. Elizabeth looked at the little boy in astonishment and said, "Then how did you guys capture him and bring him here?" "After he unintentionally ate his parents," the Dark Knight said calmly. "He willingly got locked up here, using the lowest energy absorption rate to suppress his instincts. I want you to develop him into a descendant, then charm him and bring him away." "Me?" Elizabeth's mouth was agape as she said, "Charm him? You want me to be eaten by him?" "Survival is the first instinct, followed closely by reproduction," the Dark Knight said calmly. "With your charm abilities, you should be able to temporarily control him before he eats up a city. As long as you're careful, everything will still be within your control. Turn him into your descendant and then charm him. Then we'll be able to temporarily borrow his battle prowess." Cyrus was already hugging Elizabeth's thigh and rubbing against it, saying, "Sister, you're so beautiful." Elizabeth grinned. This was the first time she was being stared at by a child in such a lecherous manner. The Dark Knight looked at Cyrus and nodded. "With him around, we should be able to deal with that monster, right? As for systems, I don't know where this saying came from, but ever since the first extraordinary human was born 30 years ago, more and more extraordinary humans have been born. All of them have a common characteristic: they have their own systems. The so-called systems are able to see a window in one's mind. Through some special events, each system will gather different energies and then deplete the energies to achieve various supernatural effects. It's a three-step process of events, absorption, and release. Take my fitness system for example. Through various missions and exercises, I'll be able to obtain training points, and the training points can be used to increase my body's potential and the effects of my training. The sports car flashed a series of afterimages before finally stopping safely in a narrow parking space. The blonde lady got off and continued, "So do you understand now? In this world, you're not the only one who has a system and extraordinary powers. The waters in this world are much deeper than you imagine." Chapter 731. Hearing the blonde beauty's explanation, Fang Xinjian was very surprised by the world before him. Does everyone have their own unique system? His heart seethed. Or could it be that all the systems here are the predecessors of Miracle World's cultivation system? Fang Xinjian blinked and looked at his stats window and techniques window. Would all the systems in this world eventually evolve into Miracle World systems? Simultaneously, the blonde beauty who had just gotten off the car turned around, looked at Fang Xinjian, and said, "Oh, right. You can call me Catherine. If you're willing, you can work under me for the time being. Other than myself, I've also gathered 2 other extraordinary humans." Catherine was a famous socialite in the upper class of the United States. At the age of 22, she was already a top-notch model in the world. She frequented various fashion magazines and was the darling of top-notch fashion and cosmetics companies. Her father was a famous real estate tycoon in the United States, Alan Douglas. She was the daughter of the Douglas family and had a fortune of over $1 billion at the time of her birth. She had even set up her own fashion brand and cosmetics company, earning hundreds of millions of USD every year. In recent years, she had even started to venture into the movie industry and could be said to be the dream lover of countless Americans. However, Fang Shijian did not care about all these. He was still astonished by the situation in this world and was thinking about the current situation. It was only when he heard that Catherine had two other extraordinary humans under her that Fang Shijian's gaze lit up. He was very curious about the two of them. Were they like Catherine, in a state where they had a structure that was half physical particles and half molecular? Therefore, Fang Shijian also got off the car and asked, "Where are they?" "The excitement of meeting your own kind?" Catherine smiled. "It's our gathering today. You'll be able to meet them later." The two of them had just stepped into the hall when a petite figure barged into Catherine's embrace. "Catherine, you're finally here." Catherine smiled and said to Fang Shijian, "This is Linda, my good sister." Behind Linda, a red-haired young man with a gloomy face slowly walked over. He glanced at Fang Shijian and said with some dissatisfaction, "Kathleen, why did you bring a stranger here?" Catherine waved it off and said, "I met him on the road, and he's also a supernatural being. Now that he's in trouble, I think he can join us." The red-haired young man frowned. He looked at Fang Shijian and said, "Not just anyone can join us. What's your system?" However, Fang Shijian was already scanning the red-haired young man's body in detail with his martial will, observing the other party's body curiously. Her body structure is still that of a normal human. In fact, there are no enhancements. That woman by the name of Linda is the same. There is no trace of a physical particle. Fang Shijian thought to himself, why is there a difference between the two? Was the system really evolving like a normal creature? Is this nature's choice? Hey, I'm asking you a question. The red-haired young man's gaze narrowed when he saw Fang Shijian in a daze, and he said unhappily. A young lady by the name of Linda walked over. Her sweet face exuded a strong hormonal aura. It was an almost perfect face, and regardless of whether it was her eyes, nose, or mouth, they all gave off a false sense of perfection. "All right, Jack. Don't bully the newcomer." Linda smiled at Fang Shijian and said, "Hello, my name is Linda, and I have a beauty system. My ability is to continuously make myself more beautiful, have a better figure, and have a better disposition. I can make my eyes bigger, my eyelashes longer, my chin sharper, and so on. Of course, I can also help others change their appearances." Catherine added, "Linda is now the hottest little diva in Hollywood. Who knows how many advertisers are lining up with money to hire her?" A hint of pride appeared on Linda's lips. She pointed to the red-haired young man next to her and said, "Jack has a music system. He can compose, sing, and even perform some sound wave attack. He has just won the Grammy Award for Best Singer." Jack, who had dyed his hair red and had thick eyeshadow, lifted his head and said proudly, "You can tell me now. What is your ability?" This red-haired young man by the name of Jack was clearly someone who was well respected in the entertainment industry due to his ability and the fact that he had Catherine's background. He had a hint of pride and arrogance that was unique to young men. Of course, this was also because Catherine and the other two only belonged to the lower echelons of the world of extraordinary humans. They still lacked understanding of the true experts in this world. After all, on this earth, extraordinary humans were still hidden in the darkness and belonged to the underground influences. Neither of them have battle abilities? Fang Shijian thought, but in this modern society, their abilities are probably more useful than ordinary battle abilities. Hearing Jack's question and seeing Catherine's and Linda's curious gazes, Fang Shijian assessed, before knowing the depth of this world, it's best not to be too high-profile. As long as there are more than 10 of those fellows from the sun, I'll probably have no choice but to escape. After all, Fang Shijian was just a passerby. He only wanted to comprehend the third level of the 9-tiered heavens, the profoundness of the past and future, and then return to Miracle World. Moreover, without the abyss and the thunder calamity, he would not be able to unleash his full power. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, he was not interested in going to war with the experts in this world. Just then, the lights in the entire hall suddenly dimmed. At the next moment, countless footsteps rang out, and several tens of gunmen appeared abruptly, accompanied by a gush of fog. All of them pointed their guns and handguns at Catherine and Fang Xinjian. The person in the lead was a black man who was about 2 meters tall. That black man was smoking a cigar, looking at the astonished Catherine and saying, "Surprised? Catherine?" Catherine frowned and slowly took 2 steps back. Sticking close to Fang Xinjian and the others, she said in a soft voice, "They're the triads from Compton Street. I'll deal with them. Later on, when they open fire, think of a way to hide yourselves." However, other than Fang Xinjian, Linda and Jack had never encountered such a situation before. Their countenances had turned pale, and they broke out in cold sweat. Without waiting for Fang Xinjian and the others to reply, Catherine let out a breath, looked at the shorty, and said, "Blake, what are you thinking of doing? Killing the first successor of the Douglas family? Your entire gang will be finished." Blake, the owner of the army system, had an army that was completely obedient to him. He could continue to earn money and spend money to upgrade this army under him, from an army of miscellaneous cold weapons in the beginning to a modern army, or even an army with high technology in the future. He could increase the number of soldiers in the army, the quality of their equipment, the physical attributes of the soldiers, and even all sorts of explosives, marksmanship, driving, computing, and so on. Moreover, no matter how many soldiers were lost, they could all be fully recovered after 24 hours. At present, the army under Blake had already reached a total of 50 people. Their battle prowess and equipment were comparable to the United States Navy SEALs. With this undying army, he had obtained quite a good result among the several hundreds of triads in Los Angeles. When Blake heard Catherine's question, he said coldly, "Catherine, you were supposed to be a big celebrity and a rich missy, and I was just doing my business. There weren't any grudges between us, but you shouldn't have beaten my younger brother into a cripple." Catherine let out a cold snort and said, "Your younger brother is a scumbag. It's one thing if he doesn't offend me, but he did. He's already lucky that I didn't beat him to death." 2 weeks ago, Blake's younger brother had met Linda by chance and was bewitched by her beauty. In a moment of hot-headedness, he had wanted to send someone to drug her and force himself on her. However, he encountered Catherine and ended up in a vegetative state. Although he knew that it was his younger brother who was in the wrong, Blake only had this one younger brother. Their parents had died long ago, and he and his younger brother only had each other to depend on. They had been working hard on the streets since they were young, and it was only in the past 2 years that they had gotten better after obtaining the army system. Now that his younger brother had been beaten up into a vegetative state, how could he possibly let the other party off? At the thought of his younger brother lying on the hospital bed in a vegetative state, Blake's countenance became distorted. "My younger brother is dead," he said with a grim countenance. "To rich people like you, he's just a scumbag. However, to me, he's my only kin. Kill them all." However, Fang Xinjian did not care about these grudges. He looked at the soldiers he had summoned, and the corners of his lips curled up into an amused expression. To think that there are physical particles in the bodies of these soldiers? There were far too many things in this world that were worthy of his research. Fang Xinjian felt that if he could decipher the profoundness behind them, his strength would receive a tremendous boost. Chapter 732. Run! At the next moment, accompanied by a furious bellow, Catherine dashed out fiercely and crashed into the crowd. With her extraordinary physical attributes, she crushed 2 gunmen's ribs and crushed their internal organs. They fell to the ground and turned into a cloud of green smoke, disappearing without a trace. When ordinary bullets hit her body, it was as if they had hit super hard rubber. They were stuck on it, unable to penetrate her body at all. Each of her dashes and each of her punches would kill off a summoned soldier. These elite warriors, who were comparable to the seals, could not withstand a single blow from her. However, as these summoned soldiers gradually surrounded her, the metal storm interweaved into many nets of death. Catherine kept on retreating, and had no choice but to look for cover. After all, she was still made of flesh and blood. She might not die after being shot over 10 times, but if she were to be hit by several hundred shots, she would be dead for sure. Just as Catherine attracted everyone's attention, Linda and Jack had already gone to hide in a corner. "Where's that person?" Linda turned and looked around, but she did not see Fang Xinjian. Jack held his head and shouted, "Who knows? Who cares if he dies? What should we do?" Continuous gunshots rang out in the distance. There were sounds of furious curses, collisions, and shouts. It was as if there was a war going on. Fang Xinjian did not make any moves. He walked among the spatial gaps and continued to use his martial will to scan Catherine's and everyone else's bodies, observing the changes during the battle. He discovered that as the battle continued, the number of physical particles in Catherine's stomach was slowly increasing. This speed was very slow, and it would probably take a few years for her entire body to be converted into 1.08 billion particles. As her cultivation intensifies, she'll gradually evolve and become a human from Miracle World? If so, will her system also become a knight's cultivation system? Fang Xinjian suddenly had a new judgment toward the world before him. In the previous world, Fang Xinjian had established a connection with Miracle World by spreading ether particles and thus returned to that world. Now that he thought about it, could it be that he had guided that world's future in the direction of Miracle World, taking the path of supernatural individuals? That was why the connection between the two had been established? Then, in this world, by helping Catherine to completely complete the transformation of her physical particles, allowing her system to become the mainstream of this world, would he be able to guide this world to become the future Miracle World, taking the path of knight's cultivation? From there, he would be able to establish a connection between the two worlds, the so-called connection between the past and the outside world. The moment this thought appeared, Fang Xinjian could not help but think, if this is really the case, then is this a special case for me, or does this mean that all divine-level cultivators will encounter something similar, guiding all the different parallel worlds toward the direction of Miracle World? Although I came to the modern era, and they came to the era of supernatural power, their purpose could be to guide history. Was this the purpose of the 9-tiered heavens? It was said that the 9-tiered heavens was created by the God of universal truth. In that case, what was the God of universal truth's purpose? Then could the extraordinary humans who started appearing in this world 30 years ago be the actions of other divine-level experts who projected themselves into a parallel world when they challenged the 9-tiered heavens? Fang Xinjian had guessed the answer to this question, but even more questions surfaced, causing Fang Xinjian to feel even more perplexed. The entire matter seemed to be shrouded in layers of fog, making it hard for one to see the truth behind it. After expanding his train of thought, Fang Xinjian's attention returned to the battlefield. Other than the changes on Catherine, he was also paying attention to the changes on the black man, Brian. Brian's body was almost no different from an ordinary person, but he was able to directly draw out the power of ether particles to increase his strength, agility, and other attributes. This allowed him to possess a physique that was comparable to that of a top-notch soldier from the Special Forces. Clearly, other than being able to summon soldiers, Brian's system could also allow his own physique to reach the level of summoning soldiers. However, as the battle progressed, although the summoned soldiers contained physical particles, they did not improve as the battle progressed. Just as Fang Xinjian was walking through the spatial gaps and observing the situation, the scales of the battle started to tip in favor of the black man, Brian. Under the crazy suppressive firepower, although Catherine dashed left and right, killing over 10 summoned soldiers consecutively, she was also seriously injured. Her physical strength plunged rapidly, and she was soon suppressed behind a bar counter. Although her physique was extremely strong, she did not have any technique in her battles. She only relied on her explosive power. On the other hand, Brian's side had been through hundreds of battles and had great teamwork with the summoned soldiers. Brian held onto a machine gun and attacked together under the cover of the summoned soldiers. He could not help but laugh out loud and said, "My dear young mistress, is a gunfight fun? Do you think that we're playing a game or playing house? When I get my hands on you, I'm going to disfigure your face." Catherine had been shot at least 20 times, and a large tendon in her left leg had been pierced through. She was half kneeling behind the bar counter, panting intensely. Her fitness system had a full-body recovery function, allowing her to recover from her injuries within a short period of time. However, no matter how short of a recovery it would not be able to make it in time for the battle. Damn it, it seems that I've underestimated them. Catherine felt a little regretful. She had too much confidence in her extraordinary powers. If she had known this would happen, she would not have rejected the bodyguards her father had arranged for her out of fear of losing her privacy. However, at that moment banging sounds of collisions rang out. This was followed by Brian's shocked and furious voice, mixed with intense gunshots. "What's going on?" Just as Catherine was feeling surprised, a series of black shadows flashed past above her head, and a summoned soldier was sent flying before her. Then with a bang, it turned into clouds and mist and dissipated into the air. This was the unique characteristic of Brian's summoned soldiers. Once they were killed, they would dissipate into clouds and mist. Catherine struggled to get up and saw an astonishing scene. A faint black shadow cut across the air, and as it got closer, the summoned soldiers fell one after another. Fists, fingers, elbows, knees. The other party's entire body seemed to be a weapon. In the darkness, piercing gunshots rang out everywhere. Catherine could barely make out the other party's silhouette through the occasional flashes of gunfire. Under the illumination of the gunfire, the summoned soldiers were being knocked down one after another. That person's black shadow kept on dashing to and fro, leaping between the shadows like he was dancing on bullets. With a light punch or a finger, a summoned soldier would fall. In less than half a minute, Brian was the only one left standing in the hall. Fang Xinjian no longer flashed and walked toward Brian slowly. "Who are you? Don't come over. Don't come over." Brian looked at Fang Xinjian with bloodshot eyes. At the next moment, he pressed down on the trigger fiercely. However, he could only hit a series of afterimages. After Fang Xinjian's dash, Brian fainted with a karate chop. Catherine was not the only one. Linda and Jack, who were behind the wall, had also popped their heads out. They watched this scene with their eyes and mouths agape. Fang Xinjian's smooth close combat made them feel as if they were watching a movie. They had initially thought that Catherine was already a superhuman existence. However, when they saw Fang Xinjian's attacks, the three of them felt an absolute difference in their abilities. Chapter 733. Fang Xinjian clapped his hands, looked at the astonished Catherine, and said, "It's settled. However, I didn't kill him. You should have a way to deal with this, right?" Catherine nodded. "I've called my uncle. He'll send someone over immediately." She limped out, and when Catherine finished her call and walked back to the hall, she discovered that Jack and Linda had unknowingly gathered around Fang Xinjian, asking him all sorts of questions curiously. Jack said, "Sword art system? You're saying that you can cultivate all sorts of sword arts with godly chi? Just like in those kung fu movies?" Linda's gaze flickered, and she asked excitedly, "Then is it to be strengthened by the system directly, or through self-cultivation? Can we learn it?" Although their systems provided them with endless wealth and social status, they were unable to give them great power. They had just experienced the scene of Fang Xinjian single-handedly defeating Brian and over 30 of his subordinates. His thunderous attack prowess and lightning-like speed made them yearn for great power. Hearing their questions, Fang Xinjian smiled. This was exactly what he wanted. He wanted to try out the path of Night's cultivation, to see if he could help these extraordinary humans who had systems, turning them into Night. Therefore, Fang Xinjian asked the same question he had asked Catherine earlier. I don't know if it's possible, but if you want to learn it, I can teach you. Of course. Jack and Linda shouted excitedly. Fang Xinjian nodded, and at the next moment, he tapped out with a finger, pressing it on their foreheads. A portion of basic nurturing sword technique gushed into their brains. Simultaneously, Fang Xinjian channeled a physical particle into Linda's body. However, he did not do the same in Jack's body. He wanted to try and see if he could guide the direction of their system's evolution. After that, the two of them were immersed in the marvelous sword technique. Catherine also walked over, interested, and asked, "Can I give it a try as well?" Of course. Before Catherine started cultivating, a part of her body had already been transformed into the structure of physical particles. Naturally, Fang Xinjian would not let go of the opportunity to guide her in her cultivation. Moreover, cultivation required a person's subjective consciousness. That was why he guided her patiently instead of forcing her by force. After a fierce gunfight of life and death, the two sides could be considered to have become friends. Half an hour later, a group of Caucasians in suits walked in and took Brian away. Catherine did not ask what they would do to Brian, and Fang Xinjian was not interested to know. For the next few days, Fang Xinjian stayed in the manor to guide the three of them in their cultivation. With Fang Xinjian's standard as a swordsmanship master, it was a piece of cake for him to guide a few beginners in swordsmanship. The result of the cultivation was very similar to what Fang Xinjian had guessed. Jack, who had not been injected with any physical particles, cultivated for many days, but there was no effect at all. Linda was injected with physical particles. Although her aptitude was average, the number of physical particles in her body increased after her cultivation, increasing from 1 to 10. There was no need to mention Catherine. She, who had the fitness system, had an extremely strong physical fitness and coordination. A large number of physical particles had been converted into her stomach. After a few days of training, she could be said to have improved by leaps and bounds, reaching the level of a knight apprentice. This afternoon, on the lawn of the manor, Catherine dashed out like a vigorous cheetah. The wooden sword in her hand slashed down from top to bottom, and all the muscles and bones in her body from head to toe emitted explosive crackling sounds. All the strength in her body was channeled, and the strength unleashed by this sword attack surpassed her previous limits, reaching the level of 30 tons. With this sword attack, sword cheese howled, and strong gales blew against Fang Xinjian's face, causing his long hair to dance crazily like black snakes. Linda and Jack, who were standing at the side, were shocked at the sight of this shocking strike. When had they ever seen a human display such violent power? Faced with Catherine's sword attack, Fang Xinjian tapped out gently with a finger. In that instant, the wooden sword shattered, and Catherine was sent flying out. She rolled over 10 rounds on the lawn before she came to a stop with great difficulty. Catherine lifted her head abruptly. "How did you do that?" "That sword attack earlier. I feel that even if there's a truck before me, I'd be able to crush it." The resonance of tendons and bones is just the most basic way to circulate one's strength. You still have a lot to learn. Catherine shook her head. The more she learned sword arts from Fang Xinjian, the more she felt that he was unfathomable. Just then, her phone rang. Catherine picked it up and said, "Aunt? You're coming over? You're already here? All right. I'll open the door for you." Catherine used her phone to open the manor's door remotely. She said to Fang Xinjian and the others, "My aunt is here. She's a strong woman, like an iron lady. She might not have a good attitude when she speaks, so don't hold it against her." As Catherine spoke, a middle-aged Caucasian lady with short hair, wearing work clothes and high heels walked in. When her gaze swept past Fang Xinjian, Linda, and Jack, her brows furrowed uncontrollably. Catherine, what's been going on with you for the past few days? You didn't even pick up our calls. You didn't even attend a few important meetings in the company. You've been staying at home all day just to fool around with them? Catherine said helplessly. Aunt, I'm not fooling around. You already know Jack and Linda. This is teacher Fang Xinjian. I've been learning sword arts from him for the past few days. Sword arts. Hearing this answer, this aunt's brows furrowed even more. An intense aura rose as she furrowed her brows, giving off an oppressive feeling. This middle-aged lady with fair skin was called Diana. Not only was she Catherine's aunt, but she was also the CEO of a multinational company in the United States. She led several 10,000 employees and controlled hundreds of millions of funds every day. Therefore, she naturally developed an arrogant and condescending aura. Sensing the change in Diana's aunt, Catherine quickly said, Master Fang Xinjian is also an extraordinary human. He possesses powerful sword arts and his battle prowess far surpasses mine. He was the one who defeated Brian a few days ago. Upon hearing that he was an extraordinary human, Diana finally took a proper look at Fang Xinjian. However, after knowing that it was a sword arts ability, she did not think much of it. After all, compared to the various extraordinary powers she had seen in the past, such as flames, space, mutation, invulnerability, and immense strength, sword arts did not sound very powerful. As for people like Brian, who were weak amongst extraordinary humans, she did not think much of him at all. Diana glared at Catherine and said, Catherine, it's not that I want to criticize you, but it's fine if you were just fooling around in the past. We couldn't be bothered with you. But this time around, you actually participated in a gunfight. Are you trying to scare your father and me to death? And sword arts? Just learn to play around, but don't waste all your time on it. You're the successor of the Douglas family, and there will be too many things for you to do in the future. Just leave the fighting and killing to your subordinate. Chapter 734. Catherine still wanted to rebut, but Diana did not give her the chance. She looked at Fang Xinjian and said, Fang Xinjian, right? Chinese? It doesn't matter. Thank you for saving Catherine a few days ago. Since you're an extraordinary human, I'm willing to offer you a job as the security manager of the Silver Shield Company. The annual salary will be 1 million USD. She then handed a name card to Fang Xinjian and said, Take my name card and go to the company for an interview next week. They'll take care of you. As a member of the United States upper society, Diana naturally knew about the existence of extraordinary humans. The Silver Shield Security Company that the Douglas family had set up had recruited quite a few extraordinary humans, and they did possess extraordinary battle prowess. However, to Diana, in this modern society, the things that had the greatest deciding power were still money and wealth. Although Diana was already considered a member of the United States upper society, the monsters hidden in the depths of the world, such as the Radiant Congress, the Crimson Alliance, the Dark Knights, and the Bloody Queen, were still not existences that someone of her level could come into contact with. Moreover, sword arts. Many of the extraordinary humans that Diana had come across possessed powers related to space, flames, curses, and transformations. In comparison, sword arts did not sound like much. Therefore, to her, offering a position with an annual salary of 1 million USD to Fang Xinjian was already sufficient to thank him for saving her life. However, Fang Xinjian threw an indifferent glance at her. He did not say anything, nor did he take the name card from her. Catherine, who was at the side, said angrily, Aunt, what are you doing? Master Fang Xinjian saved my life, and his sword arts are extremely powerful. I wish to hand over the company to you temporarily so that I can wholeheartedly cultivate sword arts and comprehend the profoundness of sword arts. Extremely powerful? Profoundness of sword arts? Diana sneered, shook her head, looked at her watch and said, Catherine, I still have an international conference later on and don't have the time to argue with you. I'll ask you one more time. Are you going to give up on the company to learn some sword arts? It was true that Diana had built up her prestige before Catherine for a very long time. Now that she was acting like a senior, Catherine felt a sense of pressure. However, after thinking about the feeling of cultivating sword arts for the past few days, she nodded stubbornly and said, "That's right. I want to cultivate sword arts, even if I have to give up on running the company." Good, good, good. Our Catherine has really grown up. Diana's gaze narrowed. She let out a breath and said, "Initially, I saw that you guys were just a bunch of weaklings, so I didn't want to bother you in this aspect. However, I didn't expect you to be so inexperienced in terms of extraordinary powers. You just met a random person and you think he's a master. But Master Feng Xinjian is really amazing," Linda and Jack also chimed in. "He killed dozens of heavily armed thugs all by himself. He's like Superman in the movies." "I'm leaving in 3 minutes, so I'll make it short," Diana said. "The reason why you think he is too strong is not because he is really strong, but because you are too weak. Catherine, I originally thought that you had too little contact with these things, but now it seems that it's too late." As she spoke, she raised her phone and dialed a number. "Hello? Is this White Lion? Come to XXXXX. I want you to deal with a person. He's an Asian man with a height of about 6 feet. He has long hair and is wearing a long robe. His name is Feng Xinjian. No. There's no need to beat him to death. Just knock him unconscious will do." She then put away her phone and walked out in her high heels while saying, "Later on, someone will come and fight him. You guys will know when the time comes. I'll get him to tell you guys about the current situation of extraordinary humans so that you guys won't always be clueless about the situation. Catherine, if I don't see you at the company tomorrow at 8:30 a.m., all of your bank cards will be frozen." Just as she was walking away, she suddenly turned around and smiled at Feng Xinjian. "I'm sorry, Mr. Feng. I'm not targeting you. It's just that Catherine is too young and I'm in a rush, so I was a little rough. You can still apply for a job at the Silver Shield Company. We welcome extraordinary humans like you at any time." Her tone was very polite, but there was a hint of arrogance in the depths of her eyes that could not be erased. With that, she left without even turning back, leaving behind a cool back view. This woman was indeed swift and decisive, self-centered, and incomparably unyielding. However, Feng Xinjian smiled and did not say a word. How could he possibly care about a mere mortal? On the contrary, it was this argument that stimulated Catherine's rebellious nature. She was determined to achieve good results in her sword arts cultivation and let her aunt know that she had not made the wrong choice. This was something that Feng Xinjian was happy to see happen. Therefore, the three of them continued to practice their sword art. Half an hour later, a black silhouette leaped over the wall and walked over slowly. It was a tall and handsome blond young man. He had a bright smile on his face and looked just like the big boy next door. With a sunny smile, he looked at the three of them and Feng Xinjian practicing their sword arts. Seeing their gazes, he waved his hand and asked, "I'm sorry. Which one of you is Feng Xinjian?" "Oh, all three of you are celebrities, and there's only one of you. Then you must be Feng Xinjian, right?" He pointed to Feng Xinjian and said. The person who had spoken was White Lion, whom Diana had called over earlier. He was one of the extraordinary humans recruited by the Silver Shield Security Company and possessed the metal evolution system. He could strengthen his body's toughness by repeatedly engulfing various different metals and alloys. Right now, he was already an existence that was invulnerable to weapons. Ordinary handguns and machine guns were no longer able to cause him any harm. Only powerful concussive attacks, such as rocket projectiles and howitzers, would be able to deal him any damage. However, they were only effective. If one wished to really kill him, they would still need firepower that covered a large area. Therefore, no matter where White Lion went, he would always be open and aboveboard. He was used to walking over and defeating all his opponents head-on. Right now, when he saw that there were still people practicing sword arts using cold weapons, he felt that it was a little funny. Even firearms were unable to do anything to him, so ordinary cold weapons were not even worth a mention to him. Diana was not an idiot. Although she did not place much importance on the sword art system, she still sent White Lion, who was invulnerable to weapons, to fight against Fang Xinjian to ensure that nothing would go wrong. In her opinion, being invulnerable to weapons against sword arts was a surefire way to go. Hearing White Lion's question, Fang Xinjian did not even turn his head and continued to guide Catherine on her sword arts. The body has to become one, and the internal organs have to become one as well. You also have to maintain a certain body's rhythm and frequency. You have to become one with that omnipresent power in the air. If you can do all of these, you'll be considered to have reached the entry level. While saying the requirements for the first transition, Fang Xinjian grabbed Catherine's hand, driving the circulation and frequency of the power in her body, thrusting out repeatedly. White Lion grinned and said, "It's already a modern society. Cold weapons have already been eliminated. What's the use of practicing sword arts now?" Fang Xinjian paid him no heed. He continued to hold Catherine's hand, driving her power to perform sword arts. In the end, with a swoosh, he slashed out toward the sky. When this sword slashed out, Catherine felt that her physical body, bones, organs, and breathing seemed to have become one. There was an endless amount of power in the surrounding air that gathered onto this sword. Therefore, as this sword attack tore through the air, it shot out a supersonic air current, slashing out toward the sky. In that instant, an explosive sound rang out as if thunder had struck. The sword chi instantly traversed a distance of several hundred meters, splitting the cloud layers in the sky into two, and slashing out a gap of about 1.5 kilometers in the sea of clouds. This was a sword attack at the pinnacle of the first transition. At the sight of this sword attack, Catherine could not believe that she was the one who had unleashed it. At the side, Jack and Lindo were also dumbfounded. Fang Xinjian nodded and said, "Remember this feeling. In the future, attack like this." After saying that, he turned to look at White Lion and asked, "You're looking for me?" White Lion felt that his entire body had stiffened up. How strong would the person who was able to teach someone how to slash out that sword attack earlier be? White Lion could not even think of it. He smiled awkwardly and cautiously. "Hello, I'm just passing by. You have great sword arts." However, Fang Xinjian flicked his fingers and said, "How many more extraordinary humans does the Silver Shield Company have? For how many more can you call over? For call all of them over." In the office, Diana tried calling White Lion's number but realized that he would not pick up. She frowned. "Forget it. If there's anything, the Silver Shield should inform me. It's probably settled by now." At the thought of this, she put down her cell phone and continued working. After all, this was just a small matter to her. She still had several $100 million worth of contracts to sign later. Chapter 735. Outside the manor, a black man, a Native American, and an Asian man got out of the car slowly. All of them were extraordinary humans from the Silver Shield Company. Other than one person who had stayed behind to oversee the company, all of them had rushed here under White Lion's call. The black man had a head full of pigtails and was wearing leather clothes and sunglasses. He looked just like a rapper. He shook his neck a little impatiently and said, "What the hell? To think that all of us have to come together. Do any of you know what's going on?" The Native American was wearing ordinary sportswear. His gaze was indifferent as he said, "I heard that there's an extraordinary human. He's very strong, and the three of us have to join forces to deal with him." "Very strong? How strong?" The Asian man, who was wearing a loose t-shirt and baggy pants, said while chewing on bubble gum, "I still need to rush back to play my game. Let's settle this quickly." The Asian man then took the lead and headed in the direction of the manor. The three of them were all experts who possessed systems and extraordinary abilities. In ancient times, they would be existences who could take on 10,000 people. Even in the modern era, they were still undeniably extraordinary people. All of them were being nurtured by the Silver Shield Company at a high price, and they would only be mobilized when there were special situations. They were extremely arrogant existences. However, the moment they stepped into the manor, an intense pressure descended from the sky and encompassed them. It was as if there was a hand grabbing tightly onto their hearts, making them unable to move. What is this? The trio's countenances changed drastically. At the next moment, they discovered to their astonishment that they had lost control of their physical bodies. Waves of power were transmitted from the air, as if someone was grabbing onto their physical bodies and controlling them to move forward. Not long later, three extraordinary humans with distorted expressions and eyes filled with terror slowly walked over to the lawn. White Lion threw a glance at them and shouted, "You guys are here! Come over here!" However, when he saw that the three of them were standing there without moving, he was stunned for a moment. He walked up and discovered that their physical bodies were not moving. However, their eyes were darting around, revealing an intense sense of panic. "You guys can't move?" Seeing the three of them blink fiercely, White Lion gasped. He had thought that even if they could not deal with Fang Xinjian, they would still be able to retreat unscathed after gathering the powers of a few extraordinary humans. Who would have thought that the three of them would lose without even seeing each other face to face? Moreover, they lost without any reason. They couldn't even figure out how they got hit. At this moment, White Lion looked at Fang Xinjian's back with an extremely solemn expression. Ignoring the four superhumans watching from the sidelines, Fang Xinjian continued to guide Catherine, Linda, and Jack in their sword practice. He also injected some physical particles into Jack's body to observe the changes in the trio's bodies. As they continued to practice their nurturing sword techniques, Fang Xinjian could sense that the bodies of the three of them were going through tremendous changes with every passing moment, gradually changing from human bodies to those of Miracle World. This was especially so because Catherine had the fitness system. This system had been helping Catherine in her cultivation, making her cultivation more effective. She could even directly absorb energy from ether particles to strengthen her physical body. This was an ability that could only be obtained after the first transition. However, Catherine had managed to do it in advance with the help of the system. Interesting. Fang Xinjian sensed the operation of the system in Catherine's body. If I can understand the principles behind the operation of these systems, will I be able to understand the principles behind the stats window on me as well? Miracle World stats window, skill synthesis, ether synchronization rate, and other functions are also a type of system. Therefore, Fang Xinjian looked at Jack and Linda and thought, if I can combine the abilities of their systems to create a set of sword techniques for them, I'll be able to understand the operation of their systems better. Fang Xinjian suddenly understood. If he could gather various extraordinary humans and understand the principles behind the various systems while guiding Catherine to become a knight, he would be able to gain a deeper understanding of Miracle World's knight cultivation system. Therefore, he threw a glance toward White Lion and the other three extraordinary humans, smiled and said, "Do the four of you want to learn sword arts?" The other three were stunned for a moment, but White Lion immediately dropped to his knees, lowered his head and said, "It's our honor to be able to learn sword arts under you." Therefore, over the next few days, Fang Xinjian brought the four of them to cultivate their sword arts, paying no attention to the matters in the outside world. Just as the four of them were cultivating, an intense conflict broke out between the Gambino family in the United States and the Douglas family which Catherine was from. Within a short period of time, the sharp Fang troops under the Gambino family attacked from all directions and killed over 20 important members of the Douglas family. This indirectly resulted in a loss of over $100 million, and even the entire Douglas family's business was affected. B****. Are these people crazy? Diana smashed her fist onto the office table, appearing infuriated. They won't have a good ending if they fight against us so wantonly. Could it be that they want both sides to suffer great losses? Although the wealthy families in the United States had their own armed forces, none of them would be so foolish as to fight against each other in the United States. Most of them would play around with authority, rules, and money. Moreover, they had always stopped at the right time and would not be so ruthless toward other wealthy families. It seems to be because the Gambino family has changed their leader, Jessica, who was one of Diana's subordinates, said. A person by the name of Tom has replaced the previous foreign and become the person in charge of the Gambino family. He has sent out the Fong troop, and there are many more extraordinary humans among them. We're being pushed back. Where's the police? Where's the FBI? And where's the law enforcing department? Where the hell have they gone? Diana said furiously. The United States also had its own department that managed extraordinary humans. It was called the Law Enforcing Department. This was also one of the reasons why the various large families did not act recklessly even though they recruited extraordinary humans. Diana could not understand how crazy the Gambino family could be for them to disregard the rules and act recklessly. The female secretary shook her head and said, "They killed the police and the FBI's people. Without extraordinary humans, there's no way they can go up against the sharp Fong troop. As for the people from the law enforcing department, I don't know why, but they didn't make a move, this lunatic." Hearing that the Gambino family had killed the police and the FBI's people, Diana shook her head, thinking that they had completely lost their rationality. However, the Douglas family could not die together with these lunatics. Diana asked again, "Then what about the Silver Shields people? What about White Lion and the others? Why didn't they make a move?" The female secretary threw a glance at Diana. Diana's enraged look was too terrifying, making her feel as if there was a raging storm. Other than Legend, White Lion and the other three have all disappeared. Their phones are switched off and we can't find them anywhere. Chapter 736. In the Silver Shield's headquarters, amidst deafening sounds, streams of black smoke kept on bursting out from within the building. Gunshots and sounds of killing rang out incessantly. Many black shadows flashed past the corridors at a speed that surpassed the limits of humans. Even the Silver Shield Company's highly trained gunmen found it hard to hit them. Even if they managed to hit them, they seemed to be unable to affect their movement. From time to time, a gunman would be knocked down to the ground by the black shadows. Following that, streams of blood would explode along with agonizing cries. Kacha-kacha sounds rang out, and a black shadow lifted its head from the corpse, revealing a green face and fangs, as well as a body with the head of a wolf. The gunman's corpse under it had long since been torn into pieces. The werewolf stuck out its blood-red tongue and licked its lip. A surge of wild emotions burned in its chest. The werewolf raised its head, looked toward the sky, and let out a long howl. Following this long howl, the undulating howls of wolves rang out throughout the building. It was as if they had come from a modern city to a grassland. At the top of the building, a man with long platinum-colored hair stood there while holding a golden longsword. He was panting intensely, and fresh blood would occasionally seep out from his forehead, back and calves. In front of him was a giant wolf with black fur all over its body. The giant wolf was more than 3 meters tall, and its entire body was covered in muscles that were as majestic as marble. Its long claws were like daggers, lightly scratching the ground, leaving white marks. He grinned, looked at the man before him, and said, "Legend, are you still not going to surrender? Submit to my lord, and you'll share the authority to rule over the world in the future." The person holding the golden longsword was the last extraordinary human from the Silver Shield Company, Legend. He was an extraordinary human who possessed the mythical item exchange system. He could absorb love points in the midst of being in a relationship and use the love points to increase the authority of the system, allowing him to exchange for various legendary mythical weapons. However, it was a pity that Legend was a very devoted man. This caused him to only be able to obtain points from his lover, causing his growth to be extremely slow. Clutching the victory sword in his hand tightly, Legend said coldly, "Fasa, you were originally just an ordinary person. Why did you turn into a werewolf? Why did the entire Tusk troop turn into werewolves? And where are the other extraordinary humans from the Tusk troop? Why didn't they come? Haha, are you here to scout for information? There's no harm in telling you a little. Ever since Werewolf Fasa had turned into a werewolf, he seemed to have gained a hint of arrogance." He said calmly, "The original extraordinary humans in the Fang were all killed because they were unwilling to submit to Master. If you're unwilling, I can only kill you now." As he spoke, he even bumped his sharp claws. At the next moment, the two of them collided fiercely. All sorts of flames, thunderbolts, and toxins were unleashed from the mythical fog. However, regardless of the injuries, Werewolf Fasa was able to recover in an instant, just like a cockroach that could not be killed. In particular, Fasa's physical body was extremely powerful, and each of his claws could create a strong gust of wind. His strength, speed, and physical strength were all above that of Mythical, causing Mythical to continuously retreat. Half an hour later, several tens of werewolves stood on the rooftop. Fasa grabbed Legend's neck with one hand and lifted him up into the air. Seeing that Legend was unable to move, a cruel smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Hee, how is it? Don't you Transcendents usually look down on us? How about now? You guys are just a bunch of lucky people who obtained abilities by chance. You guys don't know how to fight at all. When we also obtain extraordinary powers, you guys won't be able to withstand a single blow." With a kacha sound, Fasa broke Legend's neck. Then he closed his eyes and sensed the seething power in his body. Extraordinary power. The power he had been yearning for a very long time had finally appeared in his body. He had initially been an ordinary retired soldier who had been receiving a half-dead salary from a security company. Later on, he had joined the Gambino clan's Fang troop, but he had also been living on the edge of a blade. He had been jealous of those transcendents many times and had dreamed of obtaining that terrifying power many times. And now, he had finally succeeded. Exhaling, many strands of his fur receded, and the fangs in his mouth retracted. Fasa had returned to his original human appearance. A subordinate handed him a phone. "Hello, Master, we've completed the mission. They're all trash who can't withstand a single blow," Fasa said as he nodded. Yes. I understand." After hanging up the phone, one of his subordinates asked, "How was it, Chief? Where are we going next?" Fasa let out a cold laugh and said, "That old fart from the Douglas family is still using his connections with the law enforcing department, wanting to get the government to exert pressure on us to stop us. How could he know that even the law enforcing department has been shocked by Master's power? They can't wait to join forces, so how would they dare to stop us? The entire West Coast will become our territory." Then Fasa turned his head and said, "Douglas has a daughter, right? Where is she?" A short moment later, many black shadows scattered in all directions. Fasa looked at the bright moon in the sky and said with a cold smile, "You should be a little more obedient after kidnapping your only daughter, right?" 3 hours later, a private jet slowly came to a stop on the runway. The head of the Douglas family, Alan Douglas, got off the plane together with Diana. They had just gotten off when they saw a group of black-clothed men surrounding them. The bodyguards next to them were just about to make a move when they were dragged out by streams of black shadows that darted out. Amidst agonizing cries, they were turned into minced meat. Only one of the black-clothed men collided with a little girl. The black-clothed man was sent flying over 10 meters away and fell to the ground, spewing out a mouthful of blood. However, He wiped his mouth and stood up without a care. He looked at Alan Douglas, Diana, and the little girl standing before them with a murderous expression. This little girl was the strongest extraordinary human in the Douglas family. She was also Elena, who Alan had been bringing along to protect him all this while. Elena had a leveling up system that allowed her to continuously reach the divine level by killing humans and animals. Each time she leveled up, she would gain 5 attribute points, which could be added to her strength, agility, flexibility, endurance, and reaction. Through the Douglas family's incessant supply of animals for her to level up, she was already at level 40 and had added over 200 points into her attributes. Both her strength and agility were over 80 points, and she could be said to be a human-shaped tank. However, her full-powered attack earlier, which could turn a person into a lump of minced meat, was completely unscathed. Extraordinary human? The black-clothed man shook his head. Then at the next moment, he swelled up and turned into a werewolf that was over 3 meters tall. The over 10 black-clothed men next to him also transformed into a werewolf army amidst howls, surrounding Elena and the other two. Elena looked at this scene with a grim countenance. Alan's and Diana's countenances turned ghastly pale, and cold sweat kept breaking out on their heads. Diana shouted, "Have you guys gone mad? You guys are breaking the rules by attacking Alan in the airport. The law enforcing department won't let you off." "Law enforcing department?" The werewolf in the lead grinned and said, "The person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcing Department is currently having tea with Master." Chapter 737. Hearing this, the countenances of Alan and the other two changed. The werewolf in the lead continued, "Alan Douglas, are you still going to hang on? If you join us now, Master will bestow upon you powers that surpass that of nature, an eternal lifespan, and endless wealth." Alan Douglas was an old Caucasian man who was about 60 years old. He had sparse blonde hair, and as the head of one of the richest families in the United States, he had been through many trials and tribulations. He was like an old but strong ferocious tiger. Although he was surrounded by werewolves, his countenance was pale, and his heart was beating rapidly. He did not panic. He managed to calm himself down, looked at the monster and said, "Don't act recklessly. We can talk about anything. If you kill me, neither you nor the Gambino family will benefit from it." As expected of a big boss who's afraid of death, the werewolf looked at Alan with a mocking expression and said, "Don't worry. As long as you cooperate well, not only will we not harm you, but Master will also bestow upon you benefits that you can't even imagine." Both Alan and Diana, who was next to him, had grim countenances. As celebrities in the upper class, when had they ever been threatened like this before? However, when faced with the other party's pure brute force, they had never been in such a sorry state before. At this moment, the wealth, authority, influence, and connections that they were usually proud of appeared pale and powerless in the face of brute force. Just as Alan and Diana were feeling uneasy, a phone suddenly rang out. The werewolf shrank and turned back into his human form. It was Fassa, the leader of this small werewolf team, who had fought against Legend on the rooftop of the building. After turning back into his human form, he picked up the cell phone in his pants pocket. Their pants were clearly custom-made elastic pants that could still wrap around their bodies after transforming and would not tear apart. Looking at the caller ID, the werewolf smiled and said, "Mr. Allen, it seems that there's news from your daughter. What do you guys want?" Hearing this, Alan Douglas said angrily, "I can promise you anything, just don't hurt my daughter." At the thought of Catherine, he felt worried. Although he had been calling and sending emails to her ever since the war with the Gambino family started, he had not received any reply from Catherine. He could not help but think, could it be that she was captured by these werewolves? Although Catherine's physique was also very powerful, and she was also an extraordinary human with a system, how could she be a match for these werewolf monsters? At the thought of this, Alan Douglas looked at Fassa with eyes filled with murderous intent. Don't worry, I didn't let anyone hurt her. Fossa shrugged. It's just in case. I was afraid that you'd be too stubborn, so I sent someone to fetch Miss Catherine over. They're probably on their way now. Then Fossa picked up the phone and said, "Hello." However, not long after he picked up the call, Fossa's expression changed drastically. His eyes burned with fury. Say that again. 15 minutes ago, outside Catherine's manor. We found her. Understood, we will bring her back in a moment. After hanging up the phone, Unveil sniffed and smiled. They're inside. Go in, capture them, and kill all of them except for Catherine. As he spoke, Unveil and the 5 people behind him started to transform at the same time. The shirts and suits on their upper bodies were instantly torn apart, and their muscles bulged out. Thick brown and black wolf fur grew out, and the 6 of them instantly turned into werewolves that were 2.5 meters tall. Although they did not appear as muscular as Fossa, they still possessed strength, speed, and recovery abilities that far surpassed that of humans. With a few leaps, the 6 werewolves dashed toward the manor like black lightning bolt. They twitched their noses, and the muscles on their legs expanded and contracted, unleashing explosive powers. 1 minute later, they arrived at the lawn, following the scent. A total of 7 people, Catherine, Linda, Jack, White Lion, and the others, were floating in midair. Their eyes were closed tightly as if they were in a deep sleep. In their dreams, they were cultivating their sword techniques over and over again. As they cultivated in their dreams, their physical bodies also showed similar physical reactions. It could be said that they appeared to be sleeping, but they were actually cultivating very efficiently. This was especially so in their dreams, where they would be even more focused in their cultivation. Every minute and second felt like a few days or months, and the effects of their cultivation were outstanding. This method of cultivating in their dreams was naturally arranged by Feng Xinjian. This would make it easier for him to observe the reactions of the various systems during their cultivation, and it would also increase the efficiency of Catherine and the others' cultivation. Right now, he was continuously channeling cultivation information into them through his martial will. At the sight of this scene, Unveil and the other 5 werewolves instantly felt a little surprised and bewildered. Unveil looked at Feng Xinjian and asked, "Who are you? What are you doing?" Sensing the arrival of the 6 werewolves, Feng Xinjian did not look at them. He only scanned them with his martial will and understood their background. Aren't they extraordinary humans who have systems and have only been bestowed with extraordinary powers? Feng Xinjian could not be bothered to say much to them. He tapped White Lion's forehead with a finger. In that instant, White Lion seemed to have been pierced by a sword, and he woke up with a cry. Teacher, the past few days of cultivation had made White Lion and the others feel great admiration for Feng Xinjian. He was like a bottomless ocean. The effects of the cultivation also made White Lion secretly astonished. He could sense that the various attributes of his body had improved, and it was a qualitative leap. Feng Xinjian threw him a nonchalant glance and said, "Kill them all and then capture their boss." After saying that, he no longer looked at White Lion and the 6 werewolves. Instead, he focused on the few people who were still cultivating in their dreams. The changes to their systems and the various reactions of the ether particles made Feng Xinjian extremely fascinated. When Enfei and the other 5 werewolves heard Feng Xinjian's words, they were all enraged. "You're courting death." As they said that, they turned into 6 bolts of black lightning. 2 of them pounced toward White Lion, while the remaining 4 pounced toward Feng Xinjian. Impudent! Seeing that they were going to disturb Feng Xinjian, White Lion glared furiously, and streams of platinum sword cheese burst out from all over his body. He raised his hand and punched out, sending surging sword cheese gushing out like a laser beam. With 2 swoosh swoosh, 2 werewolves were slashed into 2. At the sight of this terrifying scene, the remaining 4 werewolves let out astonished cries and retreated several tens of meters, looking at White Lion in astonishment. This White Lion also looked at his palm in disbelief. This continued until Fang Xinjian's voice rang out from behind him. Why? Have you forgotten what I've taught you? In that instant, everything he had learned in his dream appeared in his mind. White Lion mumbled, "This is my killing technique, Golden Slash." This was a sword technique that Fang Xinjian had created based on White Lion's metal evolution system. It was a killing technique that made use of White Lion's metal body and the electron migration to create plasma sword cheese. In Fang Xinjian's opinion, this small creation had completely unleashed the potential of White Lion's system. In his eyes, White Lion had lost his value. This was why he had sent White Lion out to kill his enemies and test out his prowess in actual combat. In White Lion's opinion, his battle prowess had improved by leaps and bounds. Kill them all. Hearing Fang Xinjian's instructions and looking at the 4 werewolves, White Lion let out a savage laugh and slashed out with his hand. A stream of platinum sword cheese tore through the atmosphere. The sword cheese that were like lasers were not something that flesh and blood could fend off. Furthermore, it was as agile as a small snake as it slithered to and fro. In the blink of an eye, there was only a flash of white light, and the heads of the 4 werewolves flew up into the sky. Chapter 738. After killing 6 werewolves instantly with the Golden Slash, White Lion was stunned for a moment. This is bad. I forgot to leave them alive. He immediately searched the werewolves' bodies but did not manage to find any identity information. All he found was a cell phone. White Lion switched on the cell phone and looked at the call history. Then he made a call. After the other party picked up the call, he asked, "Hello? Is this unveil? Have you caught Catherine?" White Lion smiled. "If you're talking about those 6 puppies, I've already killed them." Fossa frowned and his gaze turned cold. "Who are you?" "Silver Shield, White Lion." "Silver Shield's surviving members? You have no idea who you've offended. I swear. No matter where you flee to. No matter who is protecting you. Our Gambino family will." Before Fossa could finish his words, White Lion had already hung up. White Lion's attitude made Fossa feel even more infuriated, and he crushed the cell phone in his hand. Alan Douglas asked, "What's wrong? How's Catherine?" Fossa threw a glance at this American magnate and said calmly, "Take them away." Although he was furious that White Lion had killed his subordinates, even if the Silver Shield still had a few extraordinary humans left, it would only be a minor problem. Right now, his most important mission was to bring Alan Douglas back to the Gambino family and hasten the process of taking over the Douglas family's wealth. At that time, with the Gambino family's power expanding once again, the number of werewolves under his master would increase once again. He might even be able to advance from a 4th-generation werewolf to a 3rd-generation werewolf, possessing even greater power. At the thought of this, his eyes narrowed slightly, and he got his subordinates to bring Douglas to one of the Gambino family's manor on the West Coast. In a manor on the West Coast, 2 Caucasian men, one old and one young, were sitting opposite each other. A game of chess was placed before them, and the 2 of them stared at it without blinking. A short moment later, the old man lifted his head and smiled bitterly. "Jefferson, your standards are getting better and better." The young man called Jefferson smiled and said, "Mr. Fitch, how do you feel now?" "How do I feel?" Fitch took a deep breath, feeling how strong and strong his body, which had been old and decrepit to begin with, was now. Under his aged appearance, he could feel that his muscles and internal organs were even healthier than when he was in university. "I've never felt so good before." Fitch used to be a high-ranking officer in the FBI. Ever since the emergence of supernatural powers 30 years ago, he was sent to the law enforcement department to be in charge of supernatural affairs. After so many years of ups and downs, although he was still immortal, he had become the person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcement Department. He could be said to be a high-ranking official, but no matter how much power and wealth he had, he couldn't buy back his lost youth. A week ago, his body deteriorated rapidly. His internal organs were failing, and he was on the verge of death. It was at this moment that the new leader of the Gambino family, Tom, appeared before him and turned him into a werewolf. Since then, his physical body had once again regained its health. In fact, it was even healthier than it had been in his youth. For these old people who had grasped wealth and power, there was nothing more desirable than regaining their youth. "That's good." Hearing Fitch's words, young Jefferson smiled as well. "Then I'll leave the rest to you. Don't worry." Old Fitch broke into a smile of one of his own. In the following period of time, he would introduce the high-ranking officials from the Law Enforcement Department and the various government departments in the West Coast to Tom, bewitching them one by one into becoming werewolves. He believed that with the temptation of a longer lifespan and extraordinary powers, this would be a piece of cake. It would not just be the West Coast. When the time came, the FBI, the Department of Defense, the Congress, and even the President might all join in. The entire United States would welcome a new era. Just then, a subordinate dressed in a black suit walked in, leaned over to young Jefferson, and said, "Sir, Fossa and the others have brought Allen back." Jefferson's eyes lit up, and after a series of attacks, he finally managed to capture Allen Douglas. Allen's wealth and connections were what his master desperately needed. "Bring them over." A short moment later, Allen Douglas, Diana, Elena, and the others walked over. Looking at Jefferson and Fitch, Allen's countenance turned grim. Clearly, he had not expected that Fitch, a high-ranking official from the law enforcing department, would be so close to the Gambino family. Allen could not understand why a high-ranking official from the law enforcing department would hold the Gambino family in such high regard, even allowing them to do so many crazy things. Fitch smiled and did not say anything. He looked at Allen as if he was looking at a clown. However, Jefferson shrugged, and in that instant, he swelled up, turning into a huge silver wolf that was over 4 meters tall. The muscles all over the huge wolf's body were like pieces of rock, and its sharp teeth gleamed with an astonishing cold gleam. Although it did not do anything to attack and merely stood there, it was like a ferocious beast. Everyone present felt their mouths go dry, and they had the misconception that their lives were in the hands of the other party. Jefferson, who had turned into a huge silver wolf, said, "Allen Douglas, do you want to know why our Gambino family is able to defeat you? Why is the law enforcing department unwilling to touch us? I can tell you that the reason is very simple. It's because we have powers and potential that no one in the world can underestimate. We can even bestow longevity to others. Our master, the great Tom Gambino, has mastered the method to turn humans into werewolves. There are a total of 5 generations of werewolves. The weakest 5th-generation werewolves will have a lifespan of 150 years after transforming. Their speed will be as fast as a galloping horse, and they can kill lions and tigers with a single punch. 4th-generation werewolves will have a lifespan of 200 years, and they can compete with sports cars in terms of speed and strength with trucks. 3rd-generation werewolves will have a lifespan of 250 years, and they can crush buildings and send tanks flying with their punches. 2nd-generation werewolves will be like me. Under the astonished gazes of Allen, Diana, and the others, Jefferson turned into a silver bolt of lightning. His body moved slightly, and with a flash, he appeared behind Elena. He reached out with his claws and slapped Elena to the ground. Even though this young girl, who had a level-up system and was known as a humanoid tank, was currently unable to put up any resistance. She was like a toy, pressed down on the ground by the huge wolf's claws. She was unable to move at all no matter how hard she tried. Jefferson said calmly, "Right now, the Gambino family has over 200 werewolves. There are also 3 second-generation werewolves like me. In the future, there will be countless high-ranking officials and tycoons joining us. Our influence will soon encompass the entire West Coast and even the United States. So, are you still going to resist?" Alan Douglas? Both Alan and Diana's countenances were pale. The power and potential that Jefferson displayed were simply astonishing, making them unable to summon any will to resist. However, just then, wolf howls suddenly rang out in the distance. The sounds of battle rang out. Chapter 739. On the lawn outside the manor. When the two werewolves saw White Lion, who had barged in, they grinned savagely. "Kid, you're courting death." The other werewolf licked his lips and said, "I'm going to rip open his intestines." After obtaining the werewolves' powers, ordinary humans were no match for them at all with their superhuman strength, speed, and terrifying recovery abilities. This had also nurtured the pride of these werewolves. Hearing the words of the two werewolves, White Lion let out a cold laugh and continued to walk forward without saying a word. The two werewolves charged over while howling. However, they had just gotten close when their heads were slashed off by platinum sword cheese under their astonished gazes, turning into two headless corpses that dropped onto the ground. Even more werewolves surged out, but White Lion did not seem to be panicking at all. He went against the pack of wolves, leaving behind a trail of broken corpses wherever he passed by. In the corridor and in the air, streams of white sword cheese shot out. Wherever they passed by, it was as if they had been slashed by lasers. Steel plates, mud walls, and wood were all slashed apart. It was White Lion who was performing the golden slash. Streams of platinum-colored sword cheese surrounded his entire body, occasionally shooting out with a single thought from him. They pierced through any reinforced concrete and killed the werewolves in the distance. Roar! The two fourth-generation werewolves bellowed furiously, and their fangs extended out. They turned into two whirlwinds and charged out. Their prowess and power were so terrifying that they could overturn a container truck. However, such power and speed were of little use against the golden slash. White Lion glared, and with a sweep of platinum sword cheese, the two fourth-generation werewolves were slashed into minced meat. Whoa! Amidst the shocked cries, the werewolves started to retreat. At the sight of this, White Lion broke into a cold smile. He sensed the waves of power in his body and revealed an extremely satisfied expression. "Quickly get rid of them. I still need to go back and cultivate with teacher." At the thought of this, he stomped hard with his feet and started to accelerate. Fang Xinjian's cultivation had not only bestowed him with the golden slash killing technique, but it had also allowed him to possess a physical attribute that far surpassed what he had been in the past. Every step he took on the cement ground would cause it to explode, creating a huge crater. He accelerated like a rocket, and in the blink of an eye, he had already caught up to the fleeing werewolf. Swoosh! 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 Under the terrified gazes of the werewolves, sword chi shot out and tore their bodies apart. No matter how powerful they were or how fast they were as vulnerable as clay before the platinum sword chi. Fang Xinjian chased them all the way to a hall and saw several tens of werewolves waiting there. The young man in the lead was Jefferson. Alan Douglas, Diana, and Elena were beside him. However, when they saw White Lion appear surrounded by sword cheese, everyone present revealed astonished expressions. Jefferson narrowed his eyes. "You're the Silver Shield's White Lion? I didn't expect your strength to increase again, to actually rush to this place." Alan said, "All right, White Lion, we've already reconciled with the Gambino family. You can stop now." The potential and power displayed by the Gambino family had already made Alan extremely astonished. The lifespan he would be able to obtain after becoming a werewolf made him very excited, and he planned on fully devoting himself to the Gambino family. Hearing that, White Lion tilted his head and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, I'm not here for the Douglas family. It's just that teacher has orders to kill all these wolf cubs and capture their master." Arrogant! The three fifth-generation werewolves bellowed furiously and pounced forward. They were only over 20 meters away from White Lion and would be able to reach him in less than half a second. Clearly, the speed at which White Lion had barged in was too fast, and these werewolves still did not know about White Lion's earlier battle achievements. They had once killed policemen who were armed with guns at this distance, and most of them would not be able to react in time. Even if they managed to react and were shot a few times, it would be of no concern to the werewolves' recovery abilities. However, at the next moment, a white light flashed before their eyes, and with astonished gazes, the heads of the 3 werewolves flew up high. The 3 of them had turned into 3 headless corpses, slamming into the wall from the momentum of their charge and falling down. At the sight of this scene, both Alan and Diana were astonished. Since when did White Lion possess such battle prowess? And who was this teacher he was talking about? However, White Lion's sword attack had infuriated many of the werewolves present. Over 30 fifth-generation werewolves and 5 fourth-generation werewolves pounced forth. Violent powers tore through the air, and strong gales gushed forth, forming waves of air currents that shot out. It was as if a tempest had been created. This was especially so for the werewolf's ferocious aura. White Lion even felt that he could smell the fishy stench coming from the werewolf's mouth. Sensing this scene, Alan and Diana closed their eyes, as if they did not dare to watch the scene of White Lion being torn apart by the wolf pack. However, faced with this astonishing power, White Lion wore a disdainful expression. With a tap of his finger, platinum sword cheese turned into a sword net, encompassing toward the charging wolf pack. In that instant, it was as if streams of laser beams had swept through the air. Wherever they passed by, the wolf pack would be dismembered. Their muscles and bones were unable to put up any resistance against this terrifying sword cheese. Amidst a series of agonizing cries, more than half of the wolf pack died instantly. The remaining ones retreated frantically, looking at White Lion in horror. This was especially so for Fossa, who had captured Alan and the others. One of his arms had been slashed off by the sword cheese, and he was looking at White Lion with an astonished gaze. Hearing the astonished cries, Alan, Diana, and Elena all looked at White Lion in disbelief. To think that the insufferably arrogant wolf pack, which had easily broken through the silver shield, had been defeated by White Lion just like that? White Lion definitely didn't have such an ability in the past, Elena said solemnly. He should only have a metal body. Alan Douglas said in astonishment, this ability that's similar to a light sword has a very strong destructive prowess. Diana did not say a word. However, when she thought of the teacher that White Lion had mentioned earlier, her eyes were filled with astonishment and doubt. Young Jefferson's gaze narrowed, and killing intent surged in his eyes. Although Tom could turn humans into werewolves, he could at most produce 2 fifth-generation werewolves every day. It would take 3 days for a 4th-generation werewolf to appear, 7 days for a 3rd-generation werewolf, and 1 month for a 2nd-generation werewolf to appear. Each one of them was an extremely precious power. How could he not be enraged at the sight of White Lion's massacre? Amidst a bestial roar, Jefferson turned into a huge silver-white wolf and said in a cold voice, "I'll only ask one last time. Surrender or die." White Lion could not be bothered to reply. He raised his hand and slashed out a stream of platinum sword cheese. However, this time around, things did not go as smoothly. The sword cheese only slashed onto Jefferson's afterimage. At the next moment, a claw shadow tore through the air and appeared behind White Lion. Chapter 740. Sparks splattered, and White Lion almost brushed against his opponent's claws as he dodged. Even so, 3 white marks were left behind by the air shock wave. It was as if a sword had slashed onto a steel plate. White Lion's gaze narrowed. The toughness of his body was almost equivalent to that of a tank's motherboard, yet his opponent was still able to leave white marks across space. How terrifying was his attack prowess! However, he had just dodged the first attack when the silver-white wolf silhouette once again appeared behind him. Like a white ghost, the wolf clawed out once again. Sounds rang out, and this time around, White Lion was caught firmly by the claw. Amidst the splattering of blood, a stream of platinum sword chi burst out abruptly and slashed onto Jefferson's body, piercing through his chest and almost slashing the huge wolf into two at the waist. Retreating several meters, White Lion looked at his waist. It was a bloody mess. What sharp claws! To think that they can tear my body apart? At the sight of this scene, a gleam flashed in Alan's and Diana's eyes. They could not help but think that if they had not been summoned to surrender but had been able to subdue this werewolf influence. However, in the next moment, under everyone's horrified gazes, a string of granulation suddenly burst out from the white wolf's wound. The granulation linked together and instantly reconnected the huge wolf's body. In less than a second, Jefferson had already recovered from his injuries. White Lion's brows twitched, and his eyes revealed astonishment. What a terrifying recovery ability! He immediately slashed out with his sword, and sword cheese surged out, turning into a sword net that encompassed out toward the huge wolf. This time around, the huge wolf once again displayed its astonishing speed. Like a phantom, it bypassed the sword net and darted toward White Lion. In that instant, the two of them were locked in a stalemate. Both White Lion and Jefferson possessed powerful offensive and defensive prowess. Both of them were wary of each other's attacking means and did not dare to receive their attacks head-on. However, they were able to use their own attacks to force the other party to retreat. As they fought, sword light and strong gales gushed out. Amidst the series of afterimages, almost no one could see the duo's movements clearly. As the sword light and claw shadows swept out, many werewolves started to panic. Retreat quickly! Everyone was shocked and started to retreat toward the hall's entrance. What's going on? A shout rang out. It turned out that Fitch from the Enforcer Department had heard the sounds of battle and walked over. When he saw the situation in the hall, he was shocked. What's going on? Who is that person? He had seen Jefferson's combat power with his own eyes. Jefferson could even tear apart a tank and was an existence that could face a modern army head-on. Yet, there was actually someone who could fight back and forth with him. Alan Douglas also stood at the side in amazement. It seemed that he did not expect the extraordinaire he had recruited to be so powerful. Simultaneously, more and more werewolves surrounded them. Other than those who had been sent out and those who had died in battle, there were still over 130 werewolves guarding the manor. All of them surrounded the hall and were extremely astonished to see the scene of White Lion fighting Jefferson. It was not that they had not encountered supernatural beings before, but it was already extremely difficult for a normal supernatural being to go up against a fourth-generation werewolf. Against a third-generation werewolf, they were often powerless to fight back. As for a second-generation werewolf, they were existences that could even go up against an army. But now they were also stopped by someone. Fitch's countenance was grim. In his memories, only certain monsters in the top-secret files of the Enforcer Department would be able to do this. This was not a world that a regional person in charge like him could understand. In fact, a regional person in charge like him and the Gambino family's werewolves had too little understanding of the extraordinary powers in this world. After all, they were not at the top of the social hierarchy and knew nothing about the secrets that could affect the world's structure and change human society. Seeing that Jefferson was unable to take down the other party even after a long time, another man and an old man let out a bellow and turned into two huge silver-white wolves. "Jefferson, don't waste time. Let's deal with him together." As the three huge wolves attacked at the same time, the pressure on White Lion suddenly increased by over 10 times. For a moment, he was in a difficult position, and blood appeared all over his body. Occasionally, his flesh would be clawed off by the other party's claws. In the end, one of the huge wolves bit down on his neck, and another bit down on his arm. Then Jefferson tore open their chests with one claw and reached in with his claws. White Lion suddenly erupted, and 10 streams of platinum sword cheese shot out from all over his body, slashing the three huge wolves. However, even though he had instantly slashed off the 3 huge wolves' necks, arms, chests, and waists, the 3 huge wolves did not move at all. At the next moment, their injuries recovered, displaying their terrifying regenerative abilities. At the sight of this scene, the many werewolves cheered in unison. However, the countenances of Alan, Diana, and the others turned grim. 3 werewolves who could tear apart tanks and were almost undying were too terrifying. If this power were to continue growing day by day, wouldn't humanity be ruled by them? With a puffed, White Lion spat out a mouthful of blood and looked at the 3 huge wolves with an unresigned expression. If it wasn't because the 3 of you joined forces, you wouldn't have been able to defeat me. We can give birth to a new comrade every month. But what about you guys? The world is destined to be ruled by our race, one of the huge wolves said in disdain. White Lion looked coldly at the 3 huge wolves and said, "Teacher will avenge me and kill all of you." "Your teacher? If he comes, we'll still tear him into pieces." Jefferson let out a cold laugh in disdain. As he spoke, Jefferson was about to crush White Lion's internal organs. However, at the next moment, light burst out from White Lion's body, and a faint phantom image appeared on his body. It was a stream of sword intent that Fang Xinjian had left in White Lion's body. It usually recorded his battle data and would be unleashed when White Lion's life was in danger. Seeing the human-shaped phantom image, White Lion smiled. "Teacher." A hint of warning flashed in the hearts of the 3 huge wolves, and they retreated over 10 meters back, surrounding the phantom image and White Lion. Alan and the others frowned, not knowing what had happened. However, Diana stared closely at the phantom image and let out a cry at the next moment. "Isn't this the Fang Xinjian who taught Catherine sword arts? Why is it him? Moreover, White Lion is calling him teacher." After Fang Xinjian threw a glance at White Lion, he frowned slightly. Then he looked at the 3 huge wolves and said calmly, "So there's someone of a higher level? Who turned you guys into werewolves? Get him to come out and meet me." Jefferson let out a cold snort and said, "Who are you? Do you want to make an enemy out of our Gambino clan?" "Enemy?" Fang Xinjian said coldly. "You guys don't even have the right to be cannon fodder." As he spoke, Fang Xinjian took a step forward and punched out toward a huge wolf. Faced with these werewolves, he did not even bother to use his sword arts. However, to the many werewolves present, this punch was as if the world was collapsing. As Fang Xinjian punched out, it was as if a bomb had been ignited in the air. Shock waves exploded out in all directions with his fist as the center, and violent powers gushed out. Before his fist even came into contact with the huge wolf, the gushing shock waves had already smashed the huge wolf into dust. Over 100 werewolves were knocked unconscious by the air currents from this punch. It was as if they had been hit by a sonic bomb, and all of them fainted. Only Jefferson and the 2 huge silver wolves managed to withstand it with astonishing physique. Alan, Diana, and Elena were enscathed under Fang Xinjian's intentional care. Alan and Diana looked at this scene in great astonishment. In their eyes, the huge silver wolf was already a top-notch, extraordinary human. However, Fang Xinjian had smashed it into minced meat with a single punch. What kind of terrifying power was this? Diana stared at this scene in a daze. Can extraordinary power be this strong? She had initially thought that although extraordinary powers were special, they were only comparable to handguns and machine guns. She had thought that they were just a type of weapon. However, this punch from Fang Xinjian had completely changed her understanding of them. The remaining 2 huge wolves also wore horrified expressions. Almost at the instant the air currents dissipated, they turned into 2 white bolts of lightning, dashing out toward the south and north respectively. They were going to escape. "Do you think you can escape?" With a flash, Fang Xinjian caught up to one of the huge wolves. Pressing down with his palm, he struck the wolf's head without holding back at all. In an instant, the huge wolf was like a firework that had been ignited. It started to explode from its head all the way to its tail, and its entire body turned into a splattering of blood. Following that, with another flash, Fang Xinjian caught up to Jefferson, who had fled over 100 meters away. With a light grab, Fang Xinjian lifted Jefferson up by the neck like he was lifting up a little chick. Jefferson let out an explosive bellow and bit out toward Fang Xinjian. However, as his mouth bit down on Fang Xinjian's neck, a loud bang rang out, and Jefferson's white teeth were shattered. His mouth was covered in blood as he looked at Fang Xinjian in terror. With the toughness of my bones, the strength of my biting, and the sharpness of my teeth, I can even tear apart a tank. How tough is his body? At this moment, Jefferson even started to suspect that with this person's toughness, even armor-piercing bullets would not be able to penetrate his defense. I just happen to be lacking a watchdog. I'll let you be the watchdog. However, with a light shake of his palm, Fang Xinjian dispelled the power on Jefferson's body. It was as if he was carrying a puppy. Under everyone's shocked and terrified gazes, Fang Xinjian slowly walked back to the hall. Chapter 741. The person who was the most astonished amongst everyone present was probably Diana. She had initially thought that Fang Xinjian was just an ordinary, extraordinary human. However, the powers he displayed had completely shattered her common sense. Sword arts? How is this sword arts? How can it possibly be sword arts? White Lion had already witnessed Fang Xinjian's powers. However, when he saw how Fang Xinjian had dealt with the white-headed werewolf with just 2 punches and a grab, as well as 3 huge wolves who could tear apart tanks and demolish buildings like toys, White Lion still felt astonished. He endured the pain and stood up respectfully. "Teacher, I'm sorry. I wasn't able to wipe them all out and caused you to come here as well." However, Fang Xinjian casually tossed Jefferson onto the ground and said calmly, "I merely used a hint of sword intent to attach to you." Hearing Fang Xinjian's words, everyone present trembled slightly. As they spoke, Fang Xinjian's martial will scanned through the entire manor, but he did not discover anyone else. Looking at Jefferson, whose mouth was covered in blood, Fang Xinjian asked curiously, "Where's the guy who turned the werewolves into werewolves? Where is he?" "Master isn't here." Jefferson continued to look at Fang Xinjian with an arrogant expression. "You've killed so many werewolves, and all of them are Master's blood and sweat. Master won't let you off." He stared at Fang Xinjian. Although he was astonished by Fang Xinjian's battle prowess, he still put on a strong front. "Not here?" Fang Xinjian frowned and turned to look at Diana, Alan Douglas, and Elena. He said calmly, "In the future, Douglas will belong to me. However, you guys will be in charge of the specific matters. I'm not interested in how to manage it. You guys will also take over the Gambino family, and the power and wealth of the entire organization will belong to you. I don't want any of it. However, once I mention the things I want, you guys must hand them over to me." A sword-like gaze swept over the 3 of them, and a majestic aura like that of a god or demon from the 9 heavens assaulted them. Although the words sounded extremely indifferent, Alan was unable to summon any will to resist. His face turned pale, and he immediately nodded and said, "I'll remember Master's words. From today onward, our Douglas family will serve Master with all our might. As long as we can satisfy your wish, we won't hesitate even if we have to use up all our wealth." As Alan Douglas spoke, his eyes were burning with passion. The power displayed by Fang Xinjian was too terrifying. Moreover, White Lion seemed to have improved tremendously after receiving Alan Douglas' guidance. It would be foolish not to cling onto such a powerful person. In particular, the Gambino family's matter today had taught him a good lesson. Compared to wealth and authority, power was the ultimate means that determined everything. Of course, this was under the condition that one had enough extraordinary power. Ordinary people would not be able to fight against it even if they had billions of wealth. Alan's gaze flickered as he thought excitedly, With him supporting the Douglas family, our family will have the capital to rise up. It might not be impossible for us to become the #1 family in the United States." Diana looked at all of this in astonishment. Although the Douglas family was not one of the wealthiest families in the United States, they had a 100-year legacy and were a real estate tycoon for several decades. They had over $100 billion worth of assets, several tens of real estate projects, over 10 financial companies, and over 10,000 employees. To think that such a tremendous amount of wealth had been taken away by Fang Xinjian with just a few words. Diana's gaze as she looked at Fang Xinjian was filled with splendor. Is this what makes power so great? With just one person, he can go up against all power and wealth. However, Fang Xinjian did not continue asking about it after that. After all, no matter how much wealth the Douglas family had, how could they possibly be of any importance to him? He was only subduing them for the sake of making it easier for him to take action later on. Fang Xinjian then looked at the person in charge of the West Coast Law Enforcing Department and grabbed Fitch. He's someone from the United States Law Enforcing Department, the official in charge of managing extraordinary powers? Alan nodded and said, "That's him." Fang Xinjian nodded. It just so happened that he needed to gather information on this. "I'll be taking this person and this puppy with me. White Lion will help you with some matters from now on. You guys can deal with the remaining werewolves. As for the first mission I'm giving you, it's to find that extraordinary human who created the werewolf." After saying that, Fang Xinjian turned to leave. "Oh right." Fang Xinjian then turned to look at Elena. Under his gaze, this young girl could not help but take a few steps back like a timid young beast. However, Fang Xinjian smiled and said, "You're very talented. Come over to my place tomorrow to learn sword art." After saying that, he grabbed Fitch and Jefferson and left. With a slight leap, he knocked through the roof with a loud bang. Then his body paused for a moment, and with a dash, he instantly broke through the sound barrier. Bringing along a series of thunderous sounds, he cut across the cloud layers and disappeared into the horizon. Just the astonishing prowess of his departure alone made everyone present admire him once again. Fang Xinjian flew back to the manor at high speed and knocked out the huge wolf with a single thought. Then Fang Xinjian tapped out with a finger, and Fitch gradually woke up. Looking at Fang Xinjian, Fitch revealed a horrified expression. "What are you trying to do?" "I'm a government official of the United States. You can't kill me," Fang Xinjian said calmly. "All right, tell me what's going on with the law enforcing department." In a small town thousands of kilometers away from the West Coast, a bespectacled young man with a head of neatly combed short hair and a suit sat in front of a desk, watching a video on his laptop in silence. The video was the battle scene in the Gambino clan's manor. Judging from the angle from which it was shot, it was clearly recorded by various surveillance cameras. When the young man saw the battle between White Lion and the huge wolf Jefferson, he only frowned slightly. However, when Fang Xinjian suddenly appeared, killed over 100 werewolves instantly, and defeated 3 huge wolves instantly, his pupils constricted, and his expression turned grim. Amazing! To think that he can instantly defeat 3 second-generation huge wolves. However, at the next moment, he stood up and headed out the door with a cold smile on his face. "I didn't expect that there to be such a powerful, extraordinary human in this world other than me." He walked to an empty space in the town and saw that there were corpses everywhere. It was as if the town had turned into a ghost town. "Even though I've completed the system upgrade, I might still be a little weaker than you. But when I upgrade the wolf god system again." As he spoke, faint wolf howls rang out in the surroundings, and many wolf shadows appeared in void space. They were the ghost wolves that he had just summoned. They could traverse void space like ghosts and were formless and immaterial. At crucial moments they could take on a physical form and attack. Each of them was harder to deal with than the second-generation werewolf. When I upgrade the system again, I'll take back what you owe me one by one." At the next moment, several hundred wolf howls rang out, and several hundred ghost wolves appeared around the young man. It was as if hell had descended, and the mortal world had turned into the netherworld. This young man was Tom, who had taken on the form of a werewolf. Clearly, the wolf god system he possessed did not just allow him to take on werewolves. Chapter 742. Although Fei Qi was the regional person in charge of the law enforcing department, he had never been a frontline warrior before. His willpower was not very strong either. Otherwise, he would not have been tempted by Tom and turned into a werewolf. As if Fang Xinjian had just threatened him slightly, Fei Qi told him everything he knew. Although the law enforcing department was in charge of managing all extraordinary powers in the United States, other than the headquarters, no regional person in charge could control any extraordinary powers. The regional troops were still made up of ordinary people who were in charge of investigation and gathering information. After obtaining their information, the law enforcing department's headquarters would then send out troops based on the specific situation. According to Fei Qi, he had only seen 4 experts from the law enforcing department, and each of them had battle prowess that was above that of a second-generation werewolf. However, one second-generation werewolf would be born every month after all. 4 to 5 second-generation werewolves would be sufficient to deal with an expert from the headquarters. Fei Qi judged that the werewolves would be able to control the entire United States government within 5 to 10 years. So, weak. Fang Xinjian's eyes narrowed slightly as he thought of the expert he had encountered on the sun's surface. That expert's strength was not below that of a Tier 3 divine level expert. Therefore, Fang Xinjian looked at Fei Qi and asked, "Then are there any extraordinary organizations in the world that are stronger than the law enforcing department? Who is the strongest extraordinary human in this world?" Fei Qi said, "There are. The strongest extraordinary human organizations in the world are the Crimson Alliance in the East and the Radiant Congress in the West. Their leader is considered to be the strongest person in this world." "How strong are they?" Fang Xinjian asked. I don't know," Fei Qi explained. "That's all classified information. All the governments are basically hiding the existence of extraordinary powers. For example, the Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress will erase the memories of the witnesses after they make a move. No one knows what their abilities are and how strong they are." Fang Xinjian frowned. It was clear that this world was different from Miracle World. One reason was because of the stability of modern society. The other reason was that the abilities of the various extraordinary humans in this world were very singular. They did not wish to expose their abilities and strength so that others could find their flaws. This resulted in many extraordinary humans hiding in the darkness. For example, Catherine and Fei Qi, the information they knew was very limited. Despite this, Fang Xinjian still had some estimation of this world's strength. His previous evaluation was probably a little too high. This world might not be as strong as he had imagined. However, with the Douglas family standing in front of him, he was happy to hide behind the scenes. He studied the systems of extraordinary humans while slowly testing out the powers of this world. Therefore, over the next few days, Fang Xinjian stayed in Catherine's villa and continued to teach sword arts to everyone. Later on, even Elena, who possessed the level-up system, came over to learn. Alan and Diana wanted to meet him, but Fang Xinjian rejected them. He only requested that they continue to expand their influence and gather information on extraordinary humans. Although Fang Xinjian did not make a move, Qi or Qi, Fei Qi, Xinjian, He, White, Slayer, and Qi or In. With a powerful battle power, it Qi Qi the Fei Qi in Fei Hu in and expanded. Qi Fei they. With the various wealth and connections they had obtained from the underworld, the Douglas family's business got bigger and bigger. Alan's influence grew rapidly on the West Sea coast. As White Lion won many battles, his name gradually spread throughout the West Sea coast, and he was known as the White Lion the Conqueror. In Antarctica, a black steel foot stomped down fiercely on the snow-covered ground. The Dark Knight looked up at the intense snowstorm and said, "We're almost there." The terrifying snowstorm almost turned the entire world into a vast expanse of white. Other than strong gales, there was also the snowstorm. One could not even see the situation 10 meters away clearly. Behind him, the Bloody Queen was still wearing the most basic t-shirt and short skirt. However, she kept on shivering. Hearing the Dark Knight's words, she could not help but curse, ****. Why do we have to get off the plane and walk over? My blood vessels are about to be frozen. Cyrus, who was sitting on the Bloody Queen's calf, was hugging it. He smiled and leaned his face against Elizabeth's thigh, looking very satisfied. The Dark Knight's voice was still abnormally cold. The defense in front is too tight. If the fighter aircrafts were to fly over directly, they would be shot down. Just as the two of them were conversing, spots of red light turned cold. Elizabeth was about to make a move when she was stopped by the Dark Knight. "We're here. Don't make a move." At the next moment, densely packed red spots approached them. They were clearly the eyes of many skeletons. Amidst the sounds of bones colliding, the skeletons surrounded the three of them. Their empty eye sockets emitted a gloomy red light, giving off an ominous feeling. Even Elizabeth felt her scalp turn numb when she was surrounded by so many skeletons. The Dark Knight's voice rang out in her mind once again, "Don't make a move. Wait here." Therefore, after waiting for half an hour, just as Elizabeth thought that she was going to be frozen into an ice cube, the skeletons moved to the left and right, opening up a path. A man, who was so skinny that his entire body emitted a gloomy blue cold light, floated over slowly. His eyes were flashing with blue flames, and he was wearing a black robe. When he saw the three of them, the flames in his eyes seemed to flicker a little, and a cold voice entered their minds through spiritual energy. "Dark Knight, it's been a long time. State your purpose for coming here." The Dark Knight said calmly, "I want to meet Suleiman." A strange laughter rang out from the man's mouth. "Only the dead can meet the King of Death." The skeletons in the surroundings trembled, and all of them took out cold weapons such as sabers, spears, and staffs. It was as if they would make a move at any moment. However, at the next moment, a voice rang out from void space, "Let them in." All the skeletons immediately retreated like subjects who had heard the Emperor's orders. The man took a long look at the Dark Knight and said, "Come with me." Elizabeth followed behind the Dark Knight, gulped and grumbled in her mind, "Who on earth are you here to meet? And what the hell is this skinny guy?" The Dark Knight said calmly, "He's a lich. 14 years ago, he obtained the lich system and turned himself into a lich. He then led the undead calamity and engulfed almost half of Africa." 14 years ago? You're saying? That's right. The war between the two African countries 14 years ago was started because of him. Over 1 million people died in a short 2 months. We paid a huge price to wipe out thousands upon thousands of skeletons, zombies, and all sorts of creatures of darkness. We also spent up to 2 years to deal with the aftermath. Then why didn't you lock him up? The Dark Knight explained, "I'm not good at dealing with magical existences. Therefore, I sent him here and handed him over to someone who specializes in magic to look after him." Elizabeth asked curiously, "Who?" "One of the world's top-notch extraordinary humans, the owner of the Netherworld system, and also the strongest magician in history, Abyss Lord Suleiman." Chapter 743. As they advanced, the group soon entered an underground passageway. They could see countless skeletons carrying out all sorts of excavation, moving, and construction work along the way. A huge underground city gradually appeared before them. This city was filled with all sorts of undead soldiers, such as skeletons and zombies. They carried out all sorts of construction work without rest, continuously expanding the scope of the entire underground city. About half an hour later, the group entered the underground city's experimental area. One by one, the staff members walked back and forth, their faces pale. Elizabeth asked curiously, "They're all living people? Living people can live in this place?" The Lich leading the way grinned. "Are you sure they're living people?" At the next moment, a staff member passed through the wall. Elizabeth's countenance changed, and she scanned the surroundings. She immediately discovered that there were no shadows of the so-called staff members. Even the feet of some of them were covered in fog, and she could not see them clearly. The Lich grinned strangely and said, "They're all ghosts that Master has resurrected. They're scientific elites from the human world." Elizabeth gulped. At the next moment, she suddenly saw a familiar face with messy hair. "Hey," she said hesitantly, "could that be Einstein?" The Lich said, "He's one of the earliest batch of scientists that Master has resurrected." Along the way, they encountered many more familiar faces. Elizabeth's countenance became strange, and she wondered if she had come to the netherworld. Finally, after passing through another metal door, she saw a young man wearing a white robe doing an experiment on the experiment table. As the group arrived, he said calmly, "Give me 10 minutes. I'll be done in a moment." On the experiment table, a male death row inmate's body would occasionally tremble. Streams of blue electric currents revolved around his body, and as the young man chanted incantations, streams of black gases would occasionally gush into the death row inmate's body. At the next moment, the death row inmate opened his eyes abruptly and looked toward the white-robed young man. "Suleiman, I curse you!" As the death row inmate opened his mouth, countless locusts extended out from his mouth and charged toward the white-robed young man. Just as everyone was planning to take action, the white-robed young man snapped his fingers, and blue flames that filled the sky ignited, turning all the locusts that were charging toward him into ashes. Check his physiological index. What about his brainwaves? Does his consciousness still exist? What about the alpha particle concentration? As the white-robed young man spoke, many ghosts flew past him. About 5 minutes later, the ghosts dispersed. The white-robed young man let out a sigh, turned his head, looked at the Dark Knight and asked, "What's the matter?" The Dark Knight did not seek help directly because he knew that it would be useless to seek Suleiman's help directly. The Dark Knight said, "You're trying to transplant the system?" Suleiman nodded. "The existence of the system is dependent on the human will. According to the fluctuations and changes of the human will, it will extract the information and energy from the alpha particles. Information and energy were the foundation of the entire universe. As long as one had enough information and energy, one would be able to obtain all kinds of power. Our current research on alpha particles is nothing at all." The Dark Knight said, "I can announce to you all of my research on alpha particles." Suleiman was slightly stunned. After a moment of silence, he smiled and said, "Sorry, let's cut to the chase. I can't help you with this matter." "You already know?" Hearing that, the Dark Knight was taken aback. However, thinking of Suleiman's magic, he soon stopped dwelling on this and asked, "Why?" "The other party didn't show any malicious intent to destroy Earth," Suleiman said calmly. "As for whether tens of thousands or tens of thousands of people will die, it doesn't matter to me." The Dark Knight frowned. "Do you know how dangerous he is? Perhaps he doesn't have any malicious intent right now, but an existence like this is already a great threat. We must keep him under surveillance." Suleiman said calmly, "Threat? Our existence itself is a threat. For example, has anyone been monitoring your black technology system? Why don't you announce it and hand it over to the government?" The Dark Knight said coldly, "The current humans still don't have enough self-restraint to grasp these technologies. Once we hand it over to them, as long as one of them is unable to control their desires, it might cause great harm to the entire human world." "Then what about you?" Suleiman said calmly. Are you sure that you'll be able to control that desire at all times? The Dark Knight was stunned for a moment, but Suleiman continued, What if you lose control? Peter, you're not a god. You're just a human. It's impossible for you to control the entire world. Go back and have a good sleep. Enjoy the pleasures of the living. The Dark Knight said in a deep voice, There are 20 million femtometer robots in my brain, and the artificial intelligence Nicola is constantly monitoring my thoughts. If I were to overstep in any way and attempt to use the black technology system to gain benefits for myself, he'll detonate my brain. I've never trusted any human, and that naturally includes myself. Hearing the Dark Knight's words, everyone present was astonished. They were both astonished by the Dark Knight's viciousness and slightly astonished by his moral character. Suleiman could not help but fall silent, let out a sigh, and said, Why? No one can remain unchanged forever. I can only do my best to maintain humanity's stability. The Dark Knight stared at Suleiman and said, Help me out. I need your magic. Letting out a sigh, Suleiman said, You have a spaceship, right? What do you mean? The Dark Knight asked puzzledly. The other party has probably already arrived on Earth. Caesar has been thrown into the geosynchronous orbit. Haven't you noticed it all this while? Los Angeles, United States. In the manor, Catherine and the other 6 people were still floating in midair. Ever since they had entered the dream previously, they had only been in the dream. Fang Xinjian had been pouring in information at almost every moment, and their abilities were going through a metamorphosis with every passing minute and second. Through the research on the extraordinary powers of these few different systems, Fang Xinjian also gained a new understanding of his own system. The powers of knights come from ether particles. It's the same for these extraordinary humans. They use their wills to draw out the information and energy from ether particles, forming all sorts of extraordinary abilities. And systems are the tools they use to influence ether particles. It's the same for my knight system. It's just that the way it operates is more secretive and more perfect. It has even created things like physical particles, becoming a part of the system's carrier. While thinking, Fang Xinjian controlled Jack's body and kept on channeling energy from ether particles into him. Simultaneously, the many song scores in Jack's mind were projected out, turning into light screens that were projected in the air. Each of the songs had yet to appear in the world, but they were good songs that could be sung all over the world. Fang Xinjian's attention was naturally not on the songs themselves. Instead, it showed that he could bypass Jack's will and directly control a part of his system. If I have more samples to experiment with, I might be able to reverse engineer the system and let my knight system grasp the powers of these systems. Chapter 744. As Fang Xinjian pondered, he beckoned with his palm, and the unconscious Elena flew over. A tremendous amount of milky white light kept on gushing into her body, increasing her abilities. The leveling up system that Elena possessed allowed her to gain experience after killing her opponent. With enough experience, she would be able to level up. However, her level system was clearly different from the knight system. She did not have any extraordinary powers and could only gain 5 attribute points after leveling up, which could be freely added to her strength, agility, reaction, endurance, and flexibility. The calculation method for these 5 attributes was almost the same as the knight system. Clearly, the knight system in the future might have absorbed a portion of the advantages of this leveling up system. Through Fang Xinjian's research during this period of time, he was now able to channel energy and information from ether particles directly into her body, turning them into experience to help her level up. Right now, Elena had leveled up from level 40 to level 200, possessing a total of 800 attribute points. Fang Xinjian had helped her distribute these attributes evenly, allowing all of Elena's 5 attributes to be at least 200 points. After all, if all of them were to be piled up on a single attribute, It might result in a lack of physical strength, clumsy movements, and inability to react. It would be a waste of attribute points. With such an average distribution of attribute points, it would be able to unleash the potential of each attribute point without any wastage. Therefore, although Elena had only learned a few sets of basic sword techniques, her 5 attributes had all reached at least 200 points. She already possessed the terrifying ability to allow her physical body to surpass the speed of sound and her punches and kicks to shatter mountains and rivers. Thereafter, in order to be able to better unleash her physical attributes, Fang Xinjian imparted her with the supreme Mistwind sword. Just then, Fang Xinjian frowned slightly and looked in the direction of the manor's gate. At the next moment, his body flashed slightly, and he reassembled himself at the manor's gate. He saw that White Lion's head and chest had been bandaged up. When White Lion saw Fang Xinjian, he dropped to his knees and said with a bitter smile, "Teacher, your student is useless. When I was chasing after Tom, who created werewolves, not only did I fail to kill him, but I was also injured by him." Fang Xinjian had not expected that with White Lion's current battle prowess, he would still be seriously injured by the other party. He asked, "Is he very powerful?" White Lion said, feeling ashamed, "Right now, not only can Tom create werewolves, but he can also create a monster called the Ghost Wolf. It can turn into an incorporeal form to dodge attacks or take on a physical form to attack others. It can also turn into a formless state at any time to retreat or sneak in. It's very difficult to deal with. My injury was caused by his sneak attack. Our frontline troops have already lost over 100 people, but we're still unable to lock onto his location. After that, he sent the Ghost Wolf to attack Alan. Fortunately, he only killed one substitute and failed. Ever since Alan Douglas had been kidnapped by the werewolves, he had been more cautious this time around. He had hired a few substitutes to act as his replacements. Usually, he would hide in the underground fortifications and never come out. White Lion then requested for help. "Teacher, please make a trip down personally and capture that Tom." Hearing that, Fang Xinjian nodded but did not take it to heart. To White Lion and Alan, these matters were of great importance. However, to Fang Xinjian, it was just a fight between children. Their level was too low, and he was not interested in spending time to deal with Tom. Therefore, with a casual wave of his hand, Jack and Elena flew out. At the next moment, they opened their eyes and stood on the ground. Fang Xinjian had researched more or less the functions of these two people's systems, and he had dug out all the potential he could. Jack had been given a set of shadowless sound sword, which could make use of his system's ability to control sound waves to perform this set of killing sword technique. Its prowess was unparalleled, and its battle prowess far surpassed that of White Lion's. Elena had been brought up to level 200 by Fang Xinjian, and she was now in existence akin to a little Superman. If White Lion were to face her, he would probably be beaten to death within a few punches and kicks. Moreover, Fang Xinjian had also casually taught her a set of supreme Mistwind sword, which could bring out her powerful physical attribute. Fang Xinjian said calmly, "I've imparted the two of them with top-notch sword techniques. Now that they've come out of seclusion after learning them, they'll be able to help you expand your influence and capture Tom." White Lion had always held great admiration for the prowess of Fang Xinjian's sword arts. The fact that his own abilities had increased by over 10 times was the best proof. However, he felt that Fang Xinjian had still underestimated Tom. Even if Jack and Elena had battle prowess that was about the same as his, it would still be too much for them to deal with Tom's army of ghost wolves. Therefore, he said hesitantly, "Teacher, that Tom has several hundred ghost wolves under him, and they're not to be underestimated. Moreover, he has an unknown system, and this number is still increasing. If we don't gather our forces and get rid of them in advance, they'll definitely become a great threat in the future." White Lion thought that Fang Xinjian was still unaware of Tom's threat, so he reiterated his point. However, Fang Xinjian shook his head and said calmly to Jack and Elena, "The two of them are enough to deal with. Also, quickly unify the influences across the entire West Coast and then invite all the extraordinary humans in the vicinity over for a chat. If you can't invite them over, then kidnap them over. Within 10 days, I want all the extraordinary humans in the West Coast to appear before me." An hour later, White Lion brought Jack and Elena back to the Silver Shield's new headquarters. It was a skyscraper with a height of 30 floors. He was still very worried about how Fang Xinjian had underestimated Tom. White Lion sighed and said, "Sigh, teacher still underestimates Tom too much? Regardless of whether it's his system's potential, his forbearance, his schemes, or his abilities, all of them are extremely amazing. He's someone I've never seen before. If we can't get rid of him at one go, he'll definitely become a great threat in the future." However, Elena smiled and clenched her fist. Sensing the overwhelming power in her body, she was not afraid at all. Just then, the phone rang. White Lion picked it up, and his countenance changed as he said, "Tom's traces have been discovered at the Colorado Canyon in Arizona, United States. As one of the most famous and magnificent sceneries in the United States, this canyon had a length of over 400 kilometers. The deepest part of it was over 1,800 meters, and the widest part of the canyon's top could reach up to 28 kilometers. Looking at the canyon from within, one could not help but be amazed by the majesty of the world and the magnificence of nature. Right now, Tom was wearing a suit and sitting leisurely on a steep cliff. A ghost wolf lay meekly behind him like it was a sofa, and Tom was stroking the ghost wolf's furry head with one hand. Gunshots rang out in the canyon under Tom's feet. Occasionally, there would be enraged bellows and shouts from humans, as well as the roars of beasts. A team of over 10 gunmen kept on retreating under the attacks of 4 monsters. They seemed to be unable to put up any resistance at all. Chapter 745. The 4 monsters were clearly Cerberus. Each of them had a height of 5 meters and a length of over 15 meters. Their thick and powerful limbs were burning with blazing flames, and their 3 heads would occasionally roar toward the sky, revealing sharp teeth that were like long swords. Their skin was as rough as volcanic lava. Occasionally, lava would seep out from the surface of their bodies and drip onto the ground, bringing forth streams of flames. The gunners' bullets did not have any effect on their bodies. It was as if they were just scratching an itch. In addition to the spiritual chi of terror that the Cerberus continued to emit, many of the gunners fled in all directions within a short period of time. However, their escape was as slow as snails in front of the Cerberus. The 4 monsters were like tanks charging forward at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the gunmen were killed. Their casual swipes of their claws and careless collisions would tear apart human bodies. Then they would open their mouths and swallow the fresh flesh into the air. Looking at the 4 Cerberus that were chasing after the gunners in the valley, Tom could not help but break into a satisfied smile. His system had been upgraded once again, and he now had the ability to summon the Cerberus. These Cerberus were impenetrable and indestructible. Even if they were hit by a tank, they would be unscathed. Even if they were hit head-on by a Tomahawk cruise missile, they would only suffer from serious injuries. They could also make use of flames to undergo rapid regeneration. Moreover, the hell's flames that constantly burned on their bodies, which were at a temperature of over 1,000 degrees Celsius, could also scorch a human's will. Their strength and speed were no small matter, and the second-generation werewolves from before were like children's toys in their hands. They also constantly maintained the spiritual chi of terror 100 meters around them. It was enough to make anyone who did not have a strong will tremble in fear and give up on resisting. With these 4 Cerberus, the number of ordinary warriors no longer meant anything. They could even easily clash head-on against a tank troop. They could only be defeated if they encountered fighter aircrafts, battleships, or long-distance missile attack. Humph, after being chased by those Douglas family's lackeys for so long, it's time for me to retaliate. Tom smirked coldly. If it wasn't because you guys sent so many people for me to kill, allowing me to gather so much vengeance from the dead, I wouldn't have been able to level up so quickly and be able to summon the Cerberus. It turned out that Tom had been intentionally escaping all this while so that the Douglas family would keep on sending people over for him to kill. He wanted to collect the resentment of the dead and level up his wolf god system. Therefore, for the next few hours, Tom stayed in the valley, using himself as bait to attract the Douglas clan's gunmen to attack him. In just 2 hours, a total of 4 waves of more than 50 gunmen had entered the valley, but all of them had become food for the Cerberus. The terrifying roars had become the nightmares of countless people. In the next half an hour, although there were many people wandering around the periphery and observing, no one dared to approach. Tom sneered and thought to himself, "You don't dare to come? Fine, if you don't dare to come, then it's my turn to kill my way over." At the thought of how Tom had been hiding all over the place during this period of time, fighting incessantly day and night. Although he had done it intentionally, he had still been holding back his anger. This made Tom furious, and he made up his mind to make the Douglas family bleed and replace them. It just so happens that their influence has been expanding during this period of time, integrating countless underworld organizations. This has saved me a lot of effort. Just then, Tom's gaze narrowed, and a hint of blue flashed in his eyes. He was sharing the vision of a ghost wolf 1 kilometer away. It was by relying on the ghost wolf's vision sharing that he was able to surround, ambush, and retreat time and time again. He was almost undefeatable. An off-road vehicle drove into the valley and slowly came to a stop. 2 men and a lady got off the vehicle, and one of them was White Lion, who had attacked him previously. It's this guy again. It seems that the other man and lady are also extraordinary humans? Tom smiled. You've come at the right time. Do you think that 3 extraordinary humans will be able to deal with me? I can give you guys a little surprise. Seeing the 3 of them slowly walking toward the Cerberus, Tom smiled and directed the Ghost Wolf army to surround the 3 of them. When the battle broke out, he could already predict that the 3 of them would be defeated by the Cerberus. He could then use the Ghost Wolves to launch a pincer attack and trap the 3 of them. White Lion walked in the valley, looking at the charred and torn corpses along the way. His brows furrowed even more tightly as he reminded them, "You guys be careful later on. Those ghost wolves come and go without a trace, and they have great teamwork. You mustn't be careless." Moreover, I heard from my subordinates that Tom seems to have an additional monster under him. It's similar to the legendary Cerberus. Ordinary gunshots have no effect on it, and its strength and speed far surpass that of the ghost wolves. You must be careful. White Lion's countenance was extremely grim. It was as he had thought. Tom's potential was too great. Within a short period of time, his subordinates' battle prowess had increased once again. Looking at how Jack and Elena did not seem to care, White Lion sighed inwardly, this time around. Teacher might really be wrong. For some reason, he had a faint ominous feeling in his mind. The 3 of them had physical attributes that far surpassed those of ordinary people. Even if they were just casually walking around, they would be able to cross a distance of several hundred meters within over 10 seconds. As the scorching sensation continued to rise in the air, the smell of sulfur and lava entered their noses. Roar! When White Lion saw the 4 Cerberus appear before him, his pupils contracted abruptly. Just by looking at their sizes and appearances, he could tell that these 4 monsters were not easy to deal with. Furthermore, the spiritual light of fear that was gushing toward them kept on stimulating the terror in his heart. Just then, endless wolf howls rang out from all directions. Many huge blue and transparent wolves appeared in the air from all directions, eyeing the 3 of them fiercely. They had clearly surrounded White Lion and the other 2 completely. There were over 400 ghost wolves. This number far surpassed White Lion's and the others' estimations. Clearly, Tom had intentionally hidden his strength during the chase earlier. White Lion's heart started to sink, and his tone was filled with an extremely tragic tone. Prepare to retreat. I'll bring up the rear. You guys charge out with all your might and immediately report this to teacher. Tom's strength has increased too rapidly. Get him to take action personally. If we let this person continue to live. Saying this, his eyes were filled with regret. He did not dare to imagine how far Tom's system could develop if it were to continue to grow. Chapter 746. Before White Lion could finish his words, Elena had already dashed out abruptly. An explosive bang rang out under her feet, and a huge pit was formed under her feet, leaving behind a series of afterimages. Wherever she passed by, a series of air currents were created, and she was like a missile, smashing into the hellhound's head. It was only at this moment that a loud rumble rang out in White Lion's ears. Under his dumbfounded gaze, the hellhound's middle head had been smashed into its chest by Elena. Then, amidst a world-shaking and agonizing cry, Elena raised her leg up high and then pressed down. With a tomahawk-style kick, she stomped down and crushed the hellhound's spine with a boom. In the blink of an eye, the hellhound fell to the ground like a pool of mud. In the distance, Tom stood up abruptly, and goosebumps broke out all over his body. Who is this woman? Thinking of how a hellhound had died just like that, Tom felt both infuriated and terrified. He immediately ordered, "Kill them all!" In that instant, the remaining 3 hellhounds bellowed fiercely, and flames burst out from their bodies. They charged out toward Elena like 3 huge fireballs. Wherever they passed by, the ground would be burned into charcoal, and the temperature in the entire valley's vicinity started to rise rapidly. Faced with this world-shaking prowess, White Lion turned pale with fright. "Run quickly!" He sent out over 10 streams of platinum sword cheese, slashing them onto the 3-headed hellhound's body. However, other than infuriating it and causing a large amount of blood to spurt out, they were unable to stop the 3-headed hellhound's prowess at all. At the sight of this scene, Tom revealed a cold and contemptuous smile as he thought, "All of you can die." Just as White Lion was about to turn and flee, Elena made her move once again. Faced with the 3 huge fireballs pouncing toward her, she did not choose to take them head-on. After all, although her physical attributes were extraordinary, she would still be burned. Therefore, she did not choose to come into direct contact with the high temperature. Instead, she tapped out with a finger, and violent power gushed forth. This finger tap seemed to explode the air, instantly unleashing over 1,000 streams of sword cheese that shot out toward the 3-headed hellhound. It was the supreme Mistwind sword that Fang Xinjian had imparted to Elena. The prowess of each of the Mistwind sword's sword cheese might not be comparable to White Lion's platinum sword cheese. However, after Elena tapped out with her finger, she tapped out again. After a few consecutive taps, an overwhelming amount of sword cheese gushed out, completely encompassing the 3-headed hellhound like a tempest. There was so much sword cheese that it was as if they had gathered into a sea of swords. Sounds rang out. At this moment, it was as if there were several hundred Elenas holding small knives, surrounding the 3-headed hellhound and slashing at it incessantly. Amidst the agonizing cries, the 3-headed hellhound fell down one after another, and the flames on its body gradually extinguished. Lava kept on bursting out from their bodies like fresh blood. The sword chi did not stop, and the remaining force spread out in all directions. Amidst terrifying slicing sounds, the ground was cut 3 feet deep, and smoke and dust filled the air. White Lion looked at this scene in great astonishment. To him, the sword technique performed by Elena was like a miracle. The densely packed sword chis were a ghastly sight. Their prowess was so great that they did not lose out to a Tomahawk cruise missile. They might even be stronger than it. Tom, who was far away, watched as the 4 hellhounds died. Seeing that, He felt as though his heart would bleed. However, what terrified him even more was Elena, who had attacked with her sword. Seeing how the little girl had easily wiped out 3 of his trump cards, he felt goosebumps all over his body. He had the urge to escape immediately. It was at this moment that the attacks of the 400 ghost wolves arrived. This time around, Jack was the one who made the move. The nature of sound was vibrations, and vibrations could be an attack with the strongest destructive prowess toward physical structures in this world. When the 400 ghost wolves appeared simultaneously and pounced toward the 3 of them, Jack opened his mouth slightly, and invisible sword waves were released from his mouth. It was a special sword wave that human ears would not be able to hear. However, wherever it passed by, it was as if the world was being swept by a layer of invisible power. The ground turned into dust layer by layer, and the plants exploded into powder with a bang. Many ghost wolves also exploded with bang 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 sounds, turning into fragments amidst the intense vibrations. Under the high-frequency vibrations, there were not many physical substances that could fend off such attack. They disintegrated rapidly and dissipated into the air. It was the same for the ghost wolves. When they took on an incorporeal form, they could avoid coming into contact with any physical substances. However, when they took on a physical form, they could come into contact with others. This meant that they would be attacked. After killing over 400 ghost wolves with a single attack, Tom, who was in the distance, instantly lost the shared vision. He stood up, drenched in cold sweat, and his face was filled with horror. His feet moved rapidly, and he seemed to have turned into a series of afterimages as he fled into the distance. Terrifying! This man and woman are too terrifying. How can there be such terrifying experts? My system needs to be upgraded at least 3 more times. No, 5 more times before I can be able to go up against them. At the thought of this, his movements became increasingly faster. In the blink of an eye, he was already running on all 4 limbs, and he gradually turned into a ghost wolf. Just as he was running, a black line cut across the sky. Elena had broken through the sound barrier and was dashing toward him at an extreme speed. Almost at the instant Tom turned his head, a ferocious fist had already smashed into Tom's waist. With a pff sound, Tom's waist was smashed into 2, and fresh blood splattered out instantly. Tom's lower body remained where it was, while his upper body was sent flying. Elena tore through the atmosphere once again, and struck out another punch toward Tom's chest. However, just as Elena's fist was about to strike Tom's body with majestic air currents, Tom had already turned incorporeal and disappeared. Elena frowned and continued to strike out with her fist. She then punched out wildly in all directions, lashing out at the air. It was as if many bombs had been lit up, and amidst the series of air explosions, dust flew up into the air. Tom, who had turned incorporeal, looked at this scene in astonishment and fury. Meanwhile, his lower body was slowly regenerating. It turned out that each time his system leveled up, other than being able to command a new type of monster, he would also gain the special characteristics of a new monster. This meant that he now possessed the regenerative abilities of a werewolf, the ability to change between incorporeal and incorporeal from a ghost wolf, as well as the flames of a hellhound, fearsome spiritual cheese, and physique. This woman is a lunatic. Tom gulped and left at a rapid speed. He made up his mind that unless he was completely confident, he would definitely not come and provoke the people from the Douglas family. Is this woman the trump card of the Douglas family? Thankfully, they can't do anything to the ghost wolf's ability. Wait for me to come back next time. Tom left at a rapid speed, no longer looking behind him. His eyes were filled with a burning will to fight. Elena let out a furious bellow. She had not expected that Tom would also possess the ability to change between the ghost wolf's incorporeal and incorporeal state. Therefore, the Douglas family continued to send out various forces to search for Tom's traces. However, it was as if he had completely disappeared, never appearing again. On the other side, Jack and Elena charged over. Under Fang Xinjian's orders, they made a shocking entrance with their astonishing battle prowess. With their speed, they would be able to cross a city every few minutes. The two of them took action simultaneously, one from the south and one from the north. With the support of the Douglas family's intelligence network, they killed their way into the headquarters of those gangs, killed a batch of people, and supported another batch of people. They would then be able to take over an entire gang. All sorts of Chinese societies, Vietnamese societies, Mexican gangs, Colombian gangs, African gangs, and many others were all conquered. There was almost no one who could stop them across the entire United States West Coast. Within a short span of over 10 days, the two of them had swept through several tens of cities and towns like a tempest, expanding the Douglas family's influence across the entire West Coast and ruling over countless underworld influences. Their influence and connections spread throughout California, Oregon, Washington, and other large states, turning them into an unprecedented underworld empire. They received the close attention of the police of various states, the FBI, and other national organizations. However, they were unable to do anything to Elena and Jack. The underworld influences in the United States had always been very powerful. This was especially so for the several hundred gangs with Los Angeles as the center. They had a capital worth several trillions and a total of over several 100,000 people. They were involved in food, catering, medicinal herbs, firearms, drugs, pornography, entertainment, and over 100 other industries. They were existences that could affect the national level. However, there were many factions within the various gangs. Different gangs had different backgrounds and races, causing these gangs to fight and kill each other. They had never been unified before. One could imagine how great of a backlash the two of them would receive from their actions. Over the past half a month or so, there had been countless assassinations, arrests, sneak attacks, and encirclement attempts against the two of them. They had even been challenged, sneak attacked, and assassinated by 12 extraordinary humans. However, all of them had been useless. Instead, they had increased the two of them's prowess. With just the two of them, they were able to suppress countless gangs, causing people's expressions to change at the mention of it. Extraordinary powers started to appear in the eyes of ordinary people. Elena was also known as the female tyrant due to her powerful strength. She was known as the strongest expert on the United States West Coast and was respected and worshipped by countless gangs and several 100,000 members of the West Coast. Each of her words and actions could stir up mountains and rivers, implicating the lives of over 10,000 people. This series of actions had happened too quickly, so quickly that many people had not been able to react to it. By the time they noticed it, the Douglas family had already become an unprecedented colossus. Although it was bloated, difficult to command due to the lack of integration, difficult to restrain all of the members, and even because the wealth was too messy and massive, no one was able to calculate the exact figure, it was still a terrifying monster. There was probably no government that would be able to accept such an uncontrollable and massive influence in their territory. Moreover, they also had a tremendous amount of firearms and extraordinary powers. Therefore, the United States Supernatural Governing Organization, the law enforcing department, finally placed their attention on this underworld empire that had suddenly risen up. Chapter 747. At the Beverly Hills Hotel in Los Angeles, an extremely lively cocktail party was being held in the hotel. This time around, the organizer of the cocktail party was the Douglas family. It could be said to be an astonishing gathering of countless gangs and wealthy people across the entire United States West Coast. The focus of this banquet was naturally Elena, the female tyrant with world-shaking martial prowess who was invincible and unrivaled, who had shaken the entire West Coast. Elena was dressed in a gown and sat casually in a corner, holding a cocktail in her hand. She constantly attracted the attention of everyone present, and occasionally, people would cast their gazes toward her. However, due to Elena's killing reputation, no one dared to get close to her. Moreover, she had just thrown out 3 men who had dared to hit on her out of the cocktail party. Just then, a commotion rang out at the entrance of the hotel. Seeing that the commotion was getting louder and louder without any signs of dying down, and there were even gasps mixed in, Elena frowned. She called one of her subordinates over and asked, "What's the matter?" "It seems that 2 Chinese people got into a conflict. One of them asked the other to scram, but the other party beat up all of his bodyguards." "Oh!" Elena's brows twitched. "Are you sure that they're not intentionally causing trouble?" "That shouldn't be the case. They seem to know each other. There might be some grudges between them previously." As the subordinate spoke, he was stunned for a moment. He looked at a Chinese man who was walking over and said, "It's him." Under everyone's gazes, an elegant Chinese young man with a jade-like face walked up to Elena and sat down next to her. To think that this kid dares to offend Elena. There was an insensible male celebrity who went over earlier, but he was thrown out by Elena in less than 3 seconds. I think this kid will be done soon." However, to everyone's surprise, Elena did not throw out the man who had gotten close to her casually. Instead, she looked at the Chinese young man curiously and said, "An extraordinary human?" Her instincts told her that the other party was not to be underestimated. "You can tell?" The Chinese young man smiled and said, "I'm Tang Song. You must be Elena, right? Are you interested in getting to know each other?" One of her subordinates whispered into Elena's ear, "This is the representative of the Tang clan from Hong Kong. They also have a branch in Los Angeles." Elena looked at Tang Song and said, "You're very confident." Tang Song shrugged and did not say anything. However, his gaze toward Elena was filled with admiration. Of course, he was confident. With the heavenly immortal system, as long as he continued to satisfy the admiration required by the system, he would be able to obtain the memories and power of a heavenly immortal who had cultivated for 50 billion years. This allowed him to become a core character in the Crimson Alliance within a short year. Not only did he have a huge influence in Hong Kong, but he had also taught a lesson to a member of an enemy clan at the entrance. Shrugging his shoulders, Tang Song's smile was filled with absolute confidence. "It's better for women to be gentle. Elena, don't you think that you'll look prettier when you're gentler?" "Elena, why do you have such a Angelus, Elena, Angelus?" Hearing his words, the countless fighters from the Douglas family revealed ferocious gazes. Fang Xinjian was simply taking liberties with their leader on the spot. Elena raised her brows and was about to flare up. However, at the next moment she calmed down and said calmly, "I'll teach you a lesson next time." After saying that, she left without looking back. Is this still the female tyrant? Could it be that Elena has taken a liking to this gigolo? Seeing Elena leave just like that, countless people were extremely astonished. In their eyes, Tang Song suddenly became unfathomable. However, Tang Song picked up the cocktail that Elena had been drinking earlier, tasted it, and revealed a mysterious smile as he watched Elena's departing back. This woman is really vicious. However, subduing her is equivalent to taking over the entire West Coast's underworld influence without spending a single soldier. It's a great deal. At the next moment, a thunderous roar rang out in the sky. Tang Song looked at the sky curiously and said, "Thunder?" Elena leaped lightly into the sky the moment she stepped out of the door. Then, accompanied by a series of thunderous roars, she crossed the city and arrived above the sea a few minutes later. "Come out." As she let out a bellow, 3 men wearing special battle suits appeared behind her. Seeing Elena standing on the sea with her hands behind her back, one of the men said, "You came here intentionally? You want to deal with the 3 of us alone?" Elena said coldly, "There are too many of you, and I can't fight freely. I'm afraid I might accidentally kill you." "Hee hee," the man laughed coldly. Do you know who we are? The law enforcing department has already taken notice of you, Elena. You abused your extraordinary abilities and interfered with the mortal world, killing countless people. You have two choices now. Before he could finish his words, his head exploded. It was only then that Elena appeared behind him, her fist still in the posture of having punched out. She shook her head and said, "You only have two choices as well. Die or surrender." The remaining two men bellowed furiously and dashed out toward Elena. 1 hour later, in Beverly Hills, on the lawn of Catherine's manor, over 20 extraordinary humans were floating in midair, sleeping. They were in a dream, and Fang Xinjian kept on channeling sword intents into them to cultivate various sword techniques. Fang Xinjian's attention was fully focused on these extraordinary humans. He was observing the reactions of the systems in their bodies at almost every moment. Ever since the Douglas family had unified the entire West Coast's underworld, under Elena's lead, she had brought over 10 extraordinary humans who were either in hiding, resisting, or seeking refuge with them over to Fang Xinjian to deal with. This allowed Fang Xinjian to have a deeper understanding of the systems, and it also allowed the process of Catherine's physical body turning into physical particles to be finally completed today. However, although Catherine's entire body structure had been turned into physical particles, it still did not allow Fang Xinjian to sense the existence of Miracle World in the slightest, allowing him to break through this tier of the 9-tiered heavens. Behind Fang Xinjian, Elena knelt down on one knee. Her eyelids were lowered, and she only glanced at Fang Xinjian's back from the corner of her eyes. As she looked at this man's back, a hint of conflict flashed in her eyes. The current me. Am I a match for her? Right now, after the series of massacres in the West Coast's unification battle, Elena had already reached level 212. Both her agility and strength had exceeded 250 points, and her strength far surpassed the imagination of ordinary people. She could be said to be able to stomp on the air, fly in the air, break mountains and split seas with a single punch, kill people with a single breath, and have a body that was so strong that it could ignore tanks' main cannons. All of these had become her standard. The repeated victories and the counterattacks of her opponents, who were weak, made Elena increasingly confident in her own strength. This was especially so after she had easily killed 3 experts from the law enforcing department. This made her even more curious. She could not help but want to know, can teacher defeat me? Chapter 748. The answer to this question was like an ant nesting in her heart, making her feel extremely upset. She yearned for the answer to this question very much. However, Fang Xinjian's prowess was deeply engraved in her heart, causing her to keep on suppressing her curiosity and impulses. When Fang Xinjian turned around, Elena still lowered her head and suppressed the impulses in her heart. She said, "I'm sorry, teacher. Tom's ghost wolf technique is too powerful in terms of stealth, and we weren't able to find him. However, out of the 3 people from the law enforcing department, 1 is dead and the other 2 are injured. I've obtained some information from them." Behind Elena, the 3 people from the law enforcing department were lying flat on the grass. One of them was a headless corpse, while the other 2 had already fainted. It doesn't matter anymore. Just send someone to continue the chase. Right now, Fang Xinjian already had a sufficient number of extraordinary humans on hand, so he did not care about Tom at all. However, the matter regarding the law enforcing department caught his attention. He asked, have you found out any information about the experts in this world?" "Yes," Elena said. "The Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress are the strongest extraordinary influences in this world." The information he had obtained from the 2 extraordinary humans from the law enforcing department was not very detailed, but it was sufficient for Fang Xinjian to deduce many things. This was especially so for the information regarding the few strongest experts in the Crimson Alliance and the Radiant Congress. The law enforcing department had a very clear understanding of these. Son of God? Superhuman system? Then it seems that the guy I knocked unconscious on the sun is him. Fang Xinjian deduced based on the information. If he's the strongest expert in this world, then I won't have to be so concerned. Moreover, he had gained some results from his research during this period of time. Other than being able to control a portion of the system in the other party's body, he had also gained an understanding of part of the theory behind how the system used physical particles as a carrier. Catherine has completed the process of turning physical particles into physical particles, but I'm still unable to sense Miracle World. This means that my influence is still insufficient? Then, should I turn more people into physical particles? In that case, Fang Xinjian had given a world ether particles the previous time around. This time around, he had spread the physical particles throughout the entire world. However, if he were to really get everyone on Earth to transform into physical particles and naturally grasp the night cultivation method, then he would be able to completely change the history of the entire world. Moreover, during this process, Fang Xinjian would have a myriad of experimental materials. He might even be able to observe the true formation and evolution process of the night system. Then let's try it out first. Fang Xinjian looked at Elena and lifted his finger gently. Then her body floated up abruptly. Although Elena had the leveling up system, it was more of a strengthening effect of ether particles on her physical body. It did not change the physical nature of her body. This kind of person also had a strong physique, which was just right for Fang Xinjian to try out his method. Focus, be serious, and remember my next actions. This is a new sword technique that I'm going to teach you. It's enough to let you be reborn and become stronger. A cold voice rang out in Elena's mind. At the next moment, a numb feeling extended out from her chest. The bioelectric currents in her body condensed, extended, and flowed, causing hints of strange changes to happen in her body. Remember, this reincarnation sword technique is a set of sword technique that can completely change your body's nature and open up the path of the human body's evolution. It's also a set of pure internal martial arts that only focuses on internal movements and no external movements. You must remember this well and not make any mistake. As Fang Xinjian spoke, the energy in the ether particles turned into streams of violent electric currents and barged into Elena's body. They stimulated every single molecule and atom in her body through a unique method. It was as if each stream of electric currents had turned into a thunderbolt sword, cleansing Elena's body with overwhelming sword force and heavenly prowess. One day later, 100 physical particles were born consecutively from Elena's body. Her battle prowess did not receive a qualitative improvement, but her body's toughness and potential were all different from before. Looking at Elena, who had woken up, Fang Xinjian said, "From now on, go back and practice it every day." Elena nodded and sensed the difference in her body. It was as if her body had become stronger once again. She was still thinking about the reincarnation sword technique's description. 1.08 billion physical particles? As long as I continue to cultivate and turn my body into 1.08 billion physical particles, I'll be able to surpass the limitations of an ordinary person's physical body and possess powers like that of a god? At this moment, with the help of the changes in the 100 physical particles in her body, she could faintly sense that Fang Xinjian seemed to possess a similar power. "Teacher, is this the power that you've grasped?" At this moment, a burning ambition rose from the bottom of her heart. 3 days later, another 3 extraordinary humans woke up from their dreams and grasped the reincarnation sword technique. 2 days later, another 10 extraordinary humans woke up. 1 day later, the first ordinary person succeeded in cultivating the reincarnation sword technique. Fang Xinjian's talent was too terrifying. He had reached the 10th level of the mystical prince and had the world's top sword arts talent. This allowed his research speed to be extremely fast. After clarifying the connection between physical particles, the system, and ether particles, he had created a set of sword technique that could turn ordinary people into physical particles within a mere few days. Of course, although this sword technique had been invented, it still required time to cultivate it. Ordinary people would probably need to spend 20 to 30 years before they could completely turn their bodies into the structure of physical particles. During this process, their physiques would be strengthened by incessantly stimulating the power of ether particles. At most, they would be able to reach the level of an ordinary first transition expert. Fang Xinjian understood that this was a set of sword technique that could change the world. It was also the crux for him to attain a breakthrough to the first tier of the 9-tiered heavens. It was also the method for him to obtain more of the system's profoundness. I must disseminate this set of sword technique. The more people learn this set of sword technique, the harder it will be to change history. I'll also have more examples to observe. If I can see the process of the night system taking shape, it'll be of great help to me. A short moment later, Fang Xinjian woke Catherine up and asked directly, "You have connections to a television station, right?" As a top-notch model, an internet celebrity, a young mistress from a wealthy family, and a fashionista, Catherine naturally had connections to a television station. However, she did not understand why Fang Xinjian wanted this. Fang Xinjian said, "Help me get in touch with a television station. I want to disseminate a set of sword technique." The first method that Fang Xinjian could think of that was authoritative enough was naturally the television station. Moreover, if the strongest expert in this world only had the battle prowess of a Tier 3 divine-level expert, he would naturally not have too many reservations. Disseminate sword technique? But this. Catherine was stunned. She was even more confused as to why Fang Xinjian was going to die. "There are no buts," Fang Xinjian tapped out with a finger and sent the reincarnation sword technique's contents into Catherine's brain. "Use all your means to disseminate this set of sword technique on the internet after it's broadcasted on television. I want everyone in the world to cultivate this set of sword technique." You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.